Hello, thank you. It is now my absolute delight and pleasure to introduce Ms. Leilani Lewis, who is going to take us through the first session. Leilani is the Associate Director of Diversity Communications here at University of Washington and the newly minted chair of the University Advancement Equity Council. She is spectacular, an expert in her field, and we are so grateful to her for both being here today, but also really being a thought partner in shaping this entire two-day experience. And I'm just so grateful for you, Leilani, and I cannot wait to hear from you. So please take it away. Cheers to Leilani.
Hi, Ellen. Thank you, everybody. I'm so honored to be a part of this summer session. I've been to several now, having been at UW for about 5 years. And it's always illuminating, interesting. I get so much out of it. So it's an honor to be here, and it's an honor for me to be moderating this conversation. I am, a little bit about me, I have been at UW for 5 years. I work within the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity and in advancement in University Marketing Communications. So I started out with the Race and Equity Initiative and have done quite a bit in the communication space, especially when it comes to working on diversity, equity, inclusion, and now more importantly, anti-racism focused work. So I'm very excited to be talking to the people I'm talking to today because their work aligns so closely with what the mission and new vision and new developments and advancement are. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce longtime friend and colleague. First, I'll start with Brian Carter, and then I'll move to Ruth Dickey. Brian Carter is the Executive Director of King County for Culture, a cultural institution, and I'll let Brian talk a little bit more about that. But I met Brian 11 years ago. We were both early careers starting out at the Northwest African American Museum. And we worked in a very small nonprofit environment, and we had a lot to do to build up a community that cared about history, art, and culture in the Northwest, especially for the Black community and with the Black community. So that is my history with Brian Carter. So it's a real pleasure to bring him here and he can share his knowledge with you all today. And Ruth Dickey is the Executive Director of the Seattle Arts and Lecture Organization. And I am very honored and proud to be on the board of that organization right now and liaise partnerships between UW and SAL as a lecture educational, as an educational organization, but as an organization that brings authors and thought leaders around so many different incredible present topics. I met Ruth at a Ta-Nehisi Coates event that Sal was producing and UW was sponsoring with a group, and we brought a group of students, and it was pretty amazing. So the work that Sal was doing to bring these incredible speakers to Seattle and to UW audiences is pretty incredible. So that's my bit of intro. Brian, do you have any opening thoughts before we dive into the discussion about transformational leadership?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you for the warm introduction and for the invitation from the University of Washington. My graduate degree is from the University of Washington in Museum Studies. I worked at the Burke Museum of Natural History and Culture for a number of years, and I'm a season ticket holder for the Husky football team. So it's nice to be on the phone with some other Huskies. So good morning to everybody.
Thank you. And Ruth, have any opening thoughts? Thank you, Brian.
A huge thanks to Leilani for that really warm introduction and for inviting me to be part of the conversation today. I'm really excited to be here. I don't have nearly as many exciting UW connections as Brian does, but I'm very excited to be here with all of you. And I think I was at the community-centric fundraising conversation that really held on Monday, which was so exciting. And I know that many of you heard from him earlier in your week. And I think this is such an exciting time to be having these conversations. So I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you both, and honored to have you here. So we're going to dive into the conversation, and I really want to tee up what we're going to talk about today. So aside from the session title, I really see this conversation about transformational leadership and how equity principles, anti-racism principles become part of the DNA of an organization, and what the leader's role is in shaping that in collaboration with your stakeholders and community around you. So we're going to have people pose questions in the thought exchange and other spaces. We'll have some time for that after the discussion. And if anybody should have any questions, but I'm hoping that we can draw out some of this, the leadership that goes into this work and how you're doing that in your own organizations. So we're going to start. I have a few questions, but take it away. I really do want to know, and I think for the rest of the group, if there was space for this discussion about equity, not just the discussion, but the actions behind it, the structures, the infrastructure behind it in your organizations when you came to them, or what journey took you to this work, and how are you shaping it within your organization? Ruth, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been at Seattle Arts and Lectures. It's actually 7 years this week. And when I came to the organization, it had been through a financial crisis, to be totally candid, and had gone from a staff of 11 down to a staff of 4, and was at a moment of kind of reinvention. So the bonus of being in crisis is there's space for lots of reinvention. As we kind of evolved the organization, our real equity journey began in earnest in 2015, which was the first time that we presented Ta-Nehisi Coates for his book, Between the World and Me. And we started really thinking deeply as an organization about what that book and that conversation called on us as an organization to do, and how it called on us to make change within our own organization, what our role was kind of in the world. And so from that point, we began a learning journey. We worked with consultants and did a lot of training and learning and thinking, and also work around evolving our public programs, working in our Writers in the Schools program, which works in public schools and at Children's Hospital, to center and prioritize the needs of communities and students of color. And then in our organization to become more reflective of the community and be more responsive to the community. And that's looked lots of different ways over time, which I'm happy to talk about more, but it's definitely been a learning journey. And I guess as I start this morning, I want to acknowledge that when Leilani first invited me to be part of the conversation today, my first reaction was, oh no, like we're not done. We have so much more work to do. I can't do that. And also, like, who am I to be speaking about this as a white leader? And then I really thought about, how important it is that all of us, and particularly white leaders, are talking about this openly, are being brave and speaking about what we're learning, the mistakes we're making, what we're doing, and being accountable to communities as we engage in this work, and that it really is our work. So I'm glad to be here and to be part of this conversation, to be sharing.
Thank you so much for that. Brian, would you like to?
Sure. I think before I get to For Culture, I'll share a little bit about my background and the journey to For Culture, because I think it frames a mandate that I feel as a leader of the organization when it comes to racial equity. So as Leilani said, I started out at the Northwest African American Museum. My background has always been in history, and I feel that I'm a real product and I'm a legacy of the Black Museums movement. And inherent and a fundamental tenet of that movement is that any work that's done within the museum space is done in partnership and in tandem, and because of the community that surrounds that particular institution. So what was really important, and what I learned at a young age at the Northwest African American Museum, is that the relevance of the museum to its source community, to its surrounding community, is really the defining feature of its worth, its value. So I spent 10 years at that museum, and that was really drilled into me, and I was brought into a much larger community of African-American museums, and the ideas of accessibility, inclusion, equity were not things that were special and different and separate. They were integral to the way in which the museum actually could be birthed, that it could be sustained, and then it went about its work. So after about 10 years of working at that museum, I had a question, and that question was, these principles that are so foundational to the Black Museum movement, why and how, or why are those not more visible at large legacy white mainstream museums? And is it possible to try and transform those museums with some of the principles that I got working within Black museums? And that's when I moved to probably the largest legacy white institution on the West Coast, and that was the Oregon Historical Society. And my question was really, can I get in through the front door, get inside, and then kick the door down for accessibility for others? So bringing those principles, those lessons, and I think importantly, the strategies and tactics from my work at NAM to that space. So I feel like that was a lot of my work at the Oregon Historical Society. That was a lot of my work at the Burke as well. Just simply asking, what are the pressing issues and concerns that the community is facing at this moment? And then how and in which ways can the museum, its collections, its outreach, its public programming build bridges from those issues back to the museum rather than from the museum collection to the community, which I think is one of the problems within the cultural sector. And as I worked at these two institutions, it was troubling at times to talk about changes that were necessary when it came to accessibility and inclusion and equity in our practices, and to hear that we're not quite sure if funders are going to go along with that. And what do these changes mean for our donor base and for our visitors? And I came to understand how important it was that the values of funders in this particular moment are moving along, I think, with a more progressive and liberal agenda around racial equity. And at that point, I thought, well, now what would it look like to work in the funding space? And how could I perhaps help to shift the values of a funding organization such that it better aligned with what I thought were necessary changes within the cultural sector? So that's how I arrived at For Culture. So it's a great job. I love it, but I came there for a reason. And that's to make sure that the values of that funding organization align with the needs of communities, which is always an evolving process. It's always a lengthy process. And as Ruth said, you're never done. It's being in a consistent and active state of listening and humility for me. So that's what brought me to the organization. And that's why I wake up every day and just ask, are we doing as much as we can at the organization around racial equity? And towards that end, I mean, foundational to what we do now in our mission statement, we lead with a focus on racial equity. So that explicitness and that specificity about what we are, what we're about, and what we want to do was crucial to me in my work.
Thank you both. Thanks for telling us about your journey and where this started and where you're going. So I just want to make the distinction, SAL, being a presenting organization, a fundraising organization, there are a different set of stakeholders. There's a mission to fundraise, there's a development office, there are ways that we have to think about resources, and that's an interesting positionality. It's a different place to be in than where For Culture is a funding organization or a granting, and there's power and privilege inherent in that work as well. But and Sal holds it as a major presenter of literary giants and producers of major programs in the public school space. I wanted to just make that distinction. So these two different perspectives on equity and how it impacts the world around you really helps us to consider what we do here at UW. There are a lot of fundraisers on the line now, a lot of people who work from different positions within this, so resource giving and fundraising specifically. So with that, Ruth, if you could talk a little bit more about where you see the key opportunities from that perspective as a sort of an organization that fundraises, where you see opportunities to initiate deeper equity work within the organization and how you engage your stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is such a great question. And that's actually a really great distinction to make. Thank you for that, Leilani. And it's, early in our equity journey, I think one of the things that we did was we felt really strongly that we needed to be doing the work, and we were trepidatious about talking a whole lot about what we were doing. So in 2017, we committed that 50% or more of the speakers on all of our stages would be people of color. And we are the only presenting organization, a literary organization of our type in the country that's made a commitment like that. Our other organizations around the country, our peers, have a much more, it's a few of their speakers or some or 20%. So we're the only one that said 50% or more, but we didn't talk about that publicly. We just started doing it. And one of the things that we heard from some of our donors was, you are a literary organization. It's not your job to be a social justice organization. It's not your job to be an equity first organization. So we started doing that work. And I think actually that was a mistake as we moved through the work, that not talking about it explicitly allowed us, it didn't give us the chance to be accountable to the community. It also didn't give us a chance to be transparent about why we were doing what we were doing, why we thought it was important. And that was a real missed opportunity. And as we've moved along and gotten clearer in talking about our work and our equity work and our journey, we've actually found that it's attracted more energy and supporters to us when we're clear about it, as opposed to alienating folks, as some of our early donors and some board members even feared that it would, which has been, I think, a really important part of the journey. And then, in terms of being accountable to communities and to listening. So as we started with that commitment, and then really worked on having our audiences be more reflective of the Seattle community, more diverse, having more people of color, more young folks, and just a variety of more people in our audiences that historically hadn't been there. And as we began doing that work, then we began to hear from people and listening deeply that when they came, they were encountering volunteers who didn't look like them and ushers who didn't look like them, and they weren't feeling welcome. We heard concerns about accessibility. And so we answered some of those concerns with trainings for volunteers and talking with our presenting venue partners. Then we also began thinking about, when we invite people as guests, where are they seated in the hall? What is their experience like? We started working with organizations to give away free tickets, which is an important thing to do, but then also thinking through, well, what's the experience like for people when they get to the hall? So it's layers and layers of this work. And then we started a new strategic planning process a year ago in the fall, and we did a big set of community outreach, and we heard from about 800 different stakeholders, and we were so grateful for all that feedback. It was surveys and focus groups and interviews and conversations. And one of the things that we heard really strongly, 2 years ago, we launched a community access ticket program, which gave away free tickets, and it's about to start its third year. And we heard from a lot of folks that they didn't feel community access tickets were the right fit for them, but our ticketing levels, our prices were out of reach. And so in the coming year, we've added a $10 ticket at all events, or all series events, to make tickets more affordable, but not through the community access ticket program. So it's an iterative process of learning and trying things, and then asking people, how was that for you? How did you experience that? Our intent was to be welcoming, but what was the actual impact? How did you feel it? And then going back and learning and trying some more things and continuing on that way. And as we are looking to the future, we're looking at, how do we diversify the volunteers who are at events? How do we make sure that we're cultivating a sense of belonging? So when people come to SEL events, they feel part of a community and welcomed to that. And how do we do that on every level? Who's on our stages? Who's in our audiences? How we're communicating about things? Who's on our staff? Who's on our board? And we've had some movement on all those different metrics, and more to do and more work to do. And I think one of the gifts of equity work and being really responsive to communities, as Brian was saying, is that the more you are in conversation with communities, the more there is trust, so people can tell you what worked and what didn't. And then when all of us actually use that feedback and make changes, then there's an opportunity for closer connection, and then moving towards actually creating something together, which is the most meaningful thing any of us can do. And sorry, I got excited. I have lots to say about that. That's enough for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can I ask you a question? Oh, sorry. Leilani, is it all right if I ask her a question? I'm just curious what the percentage of POC presenters was before you set the 50% target, and just why 50%? How did that come about? What did that look like internally? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I would have to go back and do the metrics. I mean, it bounced around between 10, 25, 30% over the prior years. There were always a diversity of people on our stages, and we look to present people of color and also immigrant voices, queer voices, and trying to make sure that we had diversity throughout our series, but there was never a specific commitment to it. And 50% was just something when we thought about, okay, how do we take this really seriously, both for who we're presenting, who we're giving the microphone to, but also because our big literary series events are in Benares Hall and they sell a lot of books, and they, it also is a message we want to send to publishers, because ultimately our aim, we'd like to be part of changing the narrative in New York and other places about what gets published and what is their value and demand for. So if we're demonstrating, we are filling Benares Hall for a series that is 50% authors of color, there is a demand for these books and they need to be published, then ultimately, hopefully that begins to open the whole ecosystem of what authors are being published, what literature is showing up. So it was both for our intent for what's happening here in Seattle and an intent around what are we doing for the larger ecosystem to make change, because publishing historically has been very white and very male. So those two pieces were at work.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to follow up on that as well. I think too, it's at least 50%, right? The default being, if you dip below that, then we're defaulting to white authors who get promoted, who get visibility. So that's I guess the distinction I'd like to make. And then Brian, I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about this, about thinking of from a funding perspective for a grantor, for the way that you design grants to serve the community. What have been the key opportunities and the key conversations that you've had to advance equity in that space that's making an impact from the funding perspective?
Yeah. I think there are a few opportunities or key features of the work that we're involved in right now at For Culture. One of those is a commitment from the organization around racial equity work. And I think a lot of that commitment comes from the leadership. So it was 2 years ago, I was hired as executive director, and I'm terrible in interview. You can ask anybody who's ever interviewed me. I am just honest to a fault. I say what I'm going to do. I tell people, if you don't want it, do not hire me. I'm not going to make your life easy. I'm going to demand change, and this is what you're getting. So know what you're getting. So I came in, as I said, with a really clear, at least personal mandate. And then I think there was just transparency about my commitment to racial equity. And by racial equity, what I really mean is aligning resources against disparities. So for me, I keep it really, really simple. I like data. When I see disparities that are mostly and often right along racial lines, those are things that I want to move and reallocate resources. And as a funder, I have the ability to do that in a much more simplistic way. So commitment is one of those first opportunities that I feel like I brought. The other part, and I would say these are two parallel tracks that are essential, and that is education and action. And I think that there's often, at least within the cultural sector, there's a trend to, when you first begin to try and transform an organization, that you get stuck in the inertia of education. We need racial equity training. We need workshops. We need allyship training. And that's all true, right? Bringing people to an understanding about the past wrongs that have occurred, right, is a crucial component, that truth element before you can actually make change. And so I was all for that. We went through a really long and an ongoing process of education, myself included, where we brought in consultants, we brought in speakers, and started a book club, and we had a racial equity team, and all that's fantastic. But we give away, right, about $20 million a year. So us being stuck in a space of educating ourselves does not actually bring about racially equitable outcomes, which is what I really care about. It's not the theoretical, it's not the promise, it's the outcomes that I care about. So as we were going through this educational process and continue to go through that, what I wanted to do is to really codify and to lay out what we believed in as an organization when it came to racial equity. And for me, I think about, if I get hit by a bus, what's left after I leave? I've got energy, I've got passion, I've got leadership, but have I built into the organization ways in which a fundamental commitment to racial equity work can stay? And for me, that always begins with the mission. And as I said, our mission now fully, directly, and explicitly states that we will focus on racial equity in our work. We also redid our mission. And I think really, really crucial, and somebody had brought this up in the comments, is the values of an organization. And I would say the values of an organization are a backstop when you get stuck, when you are uncertain, when you are in the tall grass and you're not sure which direction to go. You have to be able to say, these are our values. This is our commitment to the constituency that we serve. So I feel like one of the opportunities that we had at For Culture that I really jumped on is let us set, or I should say redesign, a foundation that articulates what we believe in when it comes to racial equity work, and all the while continuing that education. And I'll say one of the things that I think is just essential from a leadership standpoint is that you're always going to have, it's either your board or your staff or constituents or donors that are going to question, and they're going to say, is it right? Is it now? Is now the time? And I think it is just crucial as a leader that you are there to say, we will do this. We will move in this direction. I'll partner with you. I'll talk with you. We'll figure out how to best do it, but we are not going backward. And there's so many times that I feel like through this process, and it will continue, where I've just had to say, we are not moving backward, not on my watch, not at this moment. The opportunity is too great and the need is too big for us to question necessary evolution that we're making around racial equity. So I feel like those are the greatest opportunities that I tried to seize on.
Thank you so much. That's excellent. And I agree with you. This is disruptive work. Often it's disruptive to the status quo. It's agitation. It's not, it's discomfort, it's change, it's transformation. And a lot of it, if you're not moving forward and there isn't a little bit of agitation, then it's not working, which gets to a question actually we got from someone who's watching. So the question is, in terms of racial equity in an organization, what is the end game or major goal? This is it might be a complicated answer that I would give, but I'm curious and I want to put it out to you both to answer. As far as, is it equal opportunity, the question says, or equal outcomes, or something else altogether? Either one of you.
Do you want to go first, Ruth?
No, I want you to go first. That's okay.
Yeah, it's a tough question. For me, I have some really specific outcomes that I want my agency, and that is the redistribution of funds to cultural organizations and cultural workers that have historically been marginalized from cultural philanthropy opportunities, whether that's government agencies, family foundations, individual donors, what have you. I believe that my mark of success at For Culture and within cultural philanthropy overall will be, have I been able to move money, period. That's the outcome that I want. And how you do that, especially within the political realm, is incredibly difficult. But to me, that's the outcome that I want personally. For my agency, what I really want, and I talk about headspace, and Leilani knows this, I talk about headspace. The outcome is always going to change and it's going to morph. But as Ruth said, I feel like your targets for what you're looking for have always got to be set in communication with the community that you actually want to serve and you want to influence. And I think that takes two things. The first one is it takes humility to say, we do not know. And even like when you're in conversations like this, or perhaps you're a more progressive organization and people say, oh, you got it, right? Oh, that's a woke organization. They're having awareness about racial equity. I think if you let that go to your head and you do not stay in a state of humility, that's a problem. So the headspace of being humble. Also, I always talk about active listening. And it's sometimes I think, especially within the cultural sector, and this is true within education, the best thing you can do is just shut the hell up. Like, stop talking. We're all brilliant. I'm sure everybody on this damn call has a BA or an MA or a PhD, and we have wonderful ways to phrase things, and we have wonderful ways to abstract, right? Like the things that happen within our country that are uncomfortable. But to me, being quiet and having a good set of questions and listening and let that influence what you do is really, really critical. So for me, that's the headspace. It's humility, it's active listening, and then the last part is acting on what you hear in a way that requires accountability. So you've got to say what it is you're going to do. You've got to make sure that you're constituency knows what it is that you're going to do. And then you've got to have some type of check-in. And that's why I say active listening. It's just a cycle that repeats. What should we be doing? Who should we be? Here's what we heard. Here's what we're attempting to do. Now, how did we do? How did we listen? Did we implement what you're asking? So it's just kind of that continual cycle. And I think that's more a headspace. The like strategies and tactics are always going to change every 2 years, every 3 years, every 5 years. But that headspace is where I think an organization has to be.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Thinking about that headspace, being in community, staying humble and staying quiet, listening and creating that positive feedback loop requires a lot of trust. We talked about that in yesterday's session, about building trust in community and being accountable. So thank you for that. Ruth, I'd love for you to answer that question as far as, is there end games? And I'd like to, thinking about goals, metrics, and all of that, it's so specific to the climate, the environment, the space you're in, the organization, your stakeholders, and the nature of your work. So it might shift as far as from my perspective as a board member as well, but would love for you to answer that.
Yeah, gosh, I want to start by thanking Brian for that, a really inspiring answer. I think that was such a great way, a beautiful way to frame it. I think for SAL, for SAL as an organization, for our public programs, I think the end game for us is we want our audience to look like Seattle's audience. We want it to be a welcoming place for everybody. And then beyond that, I want it to be a space where we are catalyzing conversations that move people towards equity work. That's something that we know anecdotally happens sometimes, and I would like that to be ultimately what's happening, that it's not just people listening to an author, but it's actually creating community, creating belonging, creating change. For our work in schools, I would love it if every student had an opportunity to feel like their story and voice matters, and they got a chance to tell their story and it got amplified and listened to. And ultimately, I want a world where race is not a determinant of educational outcomes or health outcomes for people. And that's, I feel like, the big thing that we all are working towards. And we each have a place to play in that, and Sal has a part in that. But I think it's important, I find it really important to hold that Sal succeeding in that is just part of a bigger success that we're all working towards, and that world, that just world where there are great outcomes and where institutionalized racism is not determining people's health and opportunities, will take all the different organizations and all the work moving forwards. I'm so curious, I'd love to know, Leilani, what do you think for the university? What success look like?
That's a big question and a good question. And I go back to, there is a broader vision, and I think that it's held by a lot of people, but I think success is measured in, day-to-day goals, yearly goals, and that could change. And if we're responsive, it could change. So I can't know what success looks like for the university quite yet. I can guess at it, but I think for now, making sure that, I can come in and have a voice and help shape change, then there's a movement towards something better. And I don't like to call it success or an end game or end goal, just something better for now. Thanks for throwing that back at me. I appreciate it. All my leaders on the line. And with that, we'll go to the next question, which is a great one. And it's actually one I had on my list. So thanks to whoever put this out. And it says, how can those of us who are not in leadership, big L leadership, help our organization have more leaders of color? Or how can we lead from this space that we're in? If you're not in leadership. And I guess this view or your perspective as leaders of your organizations, thinking about your staff, thinking about your stakeholders, and when you were not always in leadership in your journey.
I guess I can start. There's a saying that you can't really make change at an organization if you're in the soup line. So I think that there are limits, right, to the demands that you can make if you're leading from the middle or leading from bottom, or whatever the terms are. So I think being cognizant that it's easy for me to be much more demanding. It's easy for me to get in the face of a board member. It is not as easy when your job is much more on the line perhaps than mine is. So I think that's something that you have to be cognizant of and aware of, because you gotta be in the game if you want to fight. So I would start with that. The second thing is, I would say push within that realm that you have, such that you are comfortable when you put your head on your pillow at night. For me, before I became executive director, I've been a nuisance every place that I've ever been. I mean, really, like a nuisance. You know this, but I'm honest about that when an organization hires me. And I think that that's really essential. So if you're in the job now, or you're moving up, or you're getting a promotion, or you're going to a new organization or a new department, I think just being really clear about who you are and what you bring. And I think it's not just saying, hey, I'm going to be like a thorn in the side, but instead saying, here, I'm really clear about what my values are and how I think that these can benefit and help, whether it's the department, right, the entire university, or whatever organization you're part of. And then the other part is like personal relationships. I think leading from the middle, or whatever term we want to use, is so rarely about being the most vocal in the boardroom or in the staff meeting or in the department. To me, it's about personal relationships that you forge with those people who perhaps have greater seniority or a bigger title, such that you have a relationship of trust with them, and you are then offering counsel to them. You're there to think through all the difficulties, because so often when you're a leader, right, and you have a staff member who comes and says, you should absolutely do this, do it tomorrow, it's the right way, and your job is to say, we've got to look at this on balance. Here are the pros, here are the cons, here are the implications, here are the consequences that are going to come from this. And I think if you as a staff member have the ability to bring both a problem, a solution, and an analysis of the implications of that solution, that is an incredibly useful gift that you can give your leader. And once you have your leader's ear, your department head's ear, your dean's ear, you can absolutely make change, because they're looking at you as a thought partner. So those are my suggestions for how you might affect change if you are not at the top of your organizational hierarchy.
Thank you for that. That's great, leadership strategies from different positionalities and different positions within in this very, very, hierarchical space that we are in, especially at universities. So I'll throw that to you as well. And then I have another question about metrics from the audience. And so Ruth, if you'd like to answer that.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And one of the things we've been thinking a lot about at SAL is how each area of our work and how equity shows up in all the different decisions, and how everybody in the organization, every single person is making decisions throughout their day. And almost always there is an opportunity either in those decisions to move towards equitable outcomes, or to not make that choice. And so really thinking about, even if you are not the head decision maker in your organization or your department or your area, I would bet $1 zillion you still have choices that you're making that have an opportunity to think about how equity is showing up in those choices. So I think it's important on all different levels. And I do want to go back to something that Brian said earlier, and that Leilani referenced about funders and the role that funders play in this environment. And I think there are different authorizing elements for this work, and that I just want to thank For Culture and also the Office of Arts and Culture and also Arts Fund for their early commitment to racial equity, and saying without any equivocation that this is important, because that for many organizations that were having conversations and dialogue and questions about that gave an external reason for us to embrace this work. And I think that is super important and valuable. So the other thing that I think many of us can do, even if we're not in control, is to be that authorizing energy for other people within our organizations, within our community.
Thank you so much. I think that the last 6 months have been a time for this transformational leadership, and we're seeing voices hearing voices that we haven't heard before, seeing people that we haven't heard from before, So opportunities for leadership are sort of swelling up around especially equity, anti-racism work, and bringing some balance to the system. Can you talk a little bit about how your work has changed, or if it has at all in the last 6 months, in relation to leadership, or what you're seeing, or where things are coming from in relation to the anti-racism and equity work you're doing within your organization? Ruth.
Sure, that's a really good question. Clearly for all of us, it's a different world that we are in ways that I think are both challenging because we're all working from home and we have to navigate technology in different ways, and in ways that are really exciting because I think the broad-based movement towards racial justice that we're seeing allows us all to be bolder in our work than we might have been a few months ago, which I think is a really exciting opportunity. For us, we've been thinking a lot about, in our work with schools, what does it mean to center writers of color and students of color. And for example, when the shutdown happened, one of the things that we decided immediately was that we would commit to pay our teaching artists whether or not the schools ever reopened, even though we had no idea how we were going to pay for that, because we knew that they were our most marginalized community and we thought it was really important and we wanted to give them the space to figure out how do they support schools. Now, as we're looking at who the heck knows what's going to happen with schools in the fall, we're thinking about how do we reach students who haven't re-engaged with their schools and what's our role in trying to make sure that we're serving the students who are furthest from institutions and the educational opportunities. So thinking about that. Another thing that popped up for us right after the uprisings in response to George Floyd's murder, we were bringing Dr. Carol Anderson, which we were really excited about, and Brian Carter, we were really lucky, did the Q&A with and was in conversation with her. And as we were moving towards that, we were selling online tickets because we moved our events online, and we thought really quickly about resources, because I think a lot of times at its base, equity work is about resources. And so we made the decision that from that point forward, that all of the online ticket sales would go to organizations working for justice and centering Black community. And for us, that was a really exciting, it's the first time we've ever done anything like that, and an exciting opportunity for us to think about, we don't have limitless resources, we are not a funder, and yet also we have access to audiences, we have access to resources, we have access to power. How are we sharing those? How are we showing up? So that was an exciting learning place for us, and hopefully a place where we'll keep going and keep learning and do more.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you. Appreciate that, and making those commitments, even though they might not be popular, they might not have all the support they need, but ensuring that communities are taken care of, or the work that the privileged space that you have is utilized in a way that draws on, brings, again, more balance to the system is great direction for Sal. And Brian, I'm going to turn the question for you, but also I'm going to flip it a little bit because I have a question from the audience about your history background and how that helps you define or tear down systems of that exist within the country, I guess, within your sphere of influence, the county, the cultural sector, and understanding history. So I work for the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity, and that's a 50-year history organization founded in an activism for Black and Brown students at the University of Washington. So that informs the legacy of that particular organization, and it has transformed, and contributed to the work toward equity within the University of Washington for the last 50 years, and it's going to evolve and change, and how different iterations of that come forth. So I know I'm steeped in a historical space often within the 150-year history of the university at large. So I know that informs my work in this. I'm curious, and our audience is curious about how you use your history to move forward.
What everybody's been going through amidst the George Floyd murders and the global protests that are happening, there's this idea that like something different is happening. There's a greater understanding. And to me, it's more a revealing of something that has always been there. And maybe that's just because I'm a Black man, maybe that's just the way I was raised, but this idea that race and racism have a disproportionate impact on, as Ruth said, so many different life outcomes and health outcomes and the potential of particular groups, to me is a truth. And I think what you run into often is folks that have not experienced that. And so they don't quite trust it. Oh, you believe that that occurred and that race was a major element in that occurring. Well, I'm not quite so sure because that's not really my experience. So that's not something that I've seen. And I think what history always gives you is the ability to stitch together other incidents that are similar in nature to what you're trying to describe at that particular moment. And I think being able to establish a trend or a pattern or provide context for folks using the stories and the narratives of the past allows people to trust more what they're seeing, even though their data sample is much more limited. So I feel like that's the most effective use of history when it comes to racial equity work, is that what I am telling you, right, and I'll give you an example just from my field, is that POC organizations, I think it's something like this is POC cultural organizations around the country, receive 4% of all cultural philanthropy dollars. Well, is that true? Is that accurate? And I think being able to go, right, and provide a context of the why, right, starting with the Ford Foundation, the way in which it funded and how the NEA funded, how they have followed this consistent pattern of funding large, urban, legacy white institutions allows people to say, okay, I think what you're saying is actually true. So for me, history is always about context. It's about proving a point to those who might not trust what their eyes are telling them. And I think that's often effective. If you can give 5 examples of a current happenstance and the way in which that links to like the wrongs that have occurred in the past, I think that's an effective mode of advocacy.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing that. Having worked in a history museum, we've just drawn this so much in our work, and seeing how it's evolving and moving forward. It's maybe new tactics, maybe new words, maybe new strategies, but the story of movement for greater equity is the same. We have about 10 minutes, so I have a more really poignant question, and then we're going to do closing thoughts. And the question is, and you're both leaders, what are effective ways to hold leaders accountable in this space? And what are some examples of large and small acts that have moved the needle? And, I'll say, at the University of Washington, it's a predominantly white leadership space. And so thinking about that and the positionality that and power that people hold who have historically marginalized identities, holding leaders accountable from any space or any identity is difficult, but might be especially difficult for some. So keeping that in mind, can you answer or address that question about how to hold leaders accountable in equity and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Please feel free, Ruth.
Oh gosh. Well, I think that's a really great question. SAL is a white-led organization historically, and it's still true, even though we have more diversity on our staff. Our leadership team is all white women, and that's a really important question. And I think one of the ways that we have held ourselves accountable and have been accountable is hearing from the community. And we have been, I always think of a staff member who talked about, the response to feedback is always thank you for the feedback, even if it's really hard to hear. The feedback is a gift. And over my time at SAL, we've gotten a lot of really challenging feedback from the community. And I think that listening to the community is the most important way that leaders and organizations can be accountable. And the most important way that all of us can help hold leaders accountable is to give that feedback. And that process of listening with humility and learning and continuing to give and receive feedback is how we all, I think, move forward with accountability. I'm curious to hear, Brian, what you'll have to say.
Sure. Accountability is a tough one. I think I'll go back to what I said about like leading from the middle before. And when you call somebody a leader, right, I think you've got to kind of flip that on its head. You've got to personalize it, right? Like I'm just Brian, right? Like I'm a kid from Yakima, if you want to tell me something, if you want to critique my leadership, if you want to tell me to go in a different direction, I've got to, number one, probably like you. Number two, I've probably got to trust you and actually think that you have some of my own interests at heart. So I think trust and a personal relationship, and not just an attack, but instead, right, realizing that like your greatest ability to influence change is if you have the ear of somebody who trusts you. So that's my first thing. The second thing that I would say is, I feel like if you're unable to those really strong personal relationships with leaders that you're trying to hold accountable, you need a system of accountability. And I think that takes it takes building. So it's not just me, right, in my particular position calling you out or the leadership out, but I am helping to build a culture of accountability. So at my own organization, right, there's a racial equity team that formed right away. And I felt like that was a way in which we could hold ourselves, like me as a leader, our board, our advisory committees, accountable. It was a vehicle for staff to put forward what they thought accountability looked like without having to be out on a limb on their own with like the potential, like there's always a potential of blowback or consequences that it comes when you critique. So I think that like culture of accountability and being really active in the creation of that is really helpful. So I guess it's two ends of the spectrum. One, it's either like really deeply personal and influential, and the other one is give yourself a little bit of cover by creating whatever the systems are, right? Whether it's a task force, a working group, a board subcommittee, a departmental group that talks about accountability overall, and you are pushing that, right? What do the tactics of accountability look like? What are the outcomes and what are the pivots that are required through that accountability structure? And I think that gives some protection. So those are my two suggestions.
Thank you so much. That really, rings true the work we're trying to do in advancement. I have some comment. I have another question, but I'm not going to be able to get to it. But thank you both for answering that and addressing that. Accountability is a major part of this work. It's one facet of it among all of the others, and we're hoping to map that out in university advancement, especially with the new Equity Council. The work's already being done in the Alumni Association, other parts of the university advancement world. And that is, it's a major piece of this. So I'm really grateful for the answers to that question. And I don't think I have any more questions coming up, and we're coming up on time. If anybody has any questions for me following up, there was a question about staffing that I'm happy to address, especially if it's very specific to you, Doug. But otherwise, I'm just so grateful for this conversation. I think, again, it reinforces our belief and commitments. There's a world or environment and community around the University of Washington that's dedicated to this work, from our literary organizations to our major county, cultural funding organizations. So knowing that we have we have an ecosystem here. We have people, leaders in the community that are committed to equity, social justice, anti-racism, and truth-telling and agitation. This is the work that we have to do, and it's not always easy, but it's definitely moving forward. And it's just, you can't go backward, you're moving forward. So without further ado, I don't know how to close this properly. I'll defer to Ellen, but thank you so much, Brian and Ruth, for your time and your words today. Very illuminating conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you.
So much, Leilani. You can see everybody's applause coming through the video, and I just wanted to thank you all so much for starting us out on such a strong note. This was absolutely fantastic, and thank you for sharing with us. Everyone, we're gonna gather back together for our next session, and we are joined by the amazing Christine Newman of UW Impact, Wilson Okello, our colleague at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. And just to give you a quick intro of Christine, Christine is a great colleague of ours, and she is one of 2 employees of the UW Alumni Association. She runs our advocacy arm and does phenomenal work advocating for higher education. So thank you, Christine, for coming out of your day off and coming to do this talk with us. I will kick it over to you to start us off.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody, for the birthday wishes. I'm ecstatic to be here to welcome our next presenter. So good morning, everybody. A big welcome to all my colleagues across advancement and the UW for joining us for this impactful conversation. I spent 5 years working with or adjacent to UW, and prior to that, I obtained my MPA from the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. And before that, I worked in college access work with a nonprofit in Cleveland, Ohio. So my two passions are higher education and access to higher education. Before I kick this session off, please know there will be an opportunity for questions at the end of Wilson's dialogue. So please utilize that chat during this session, submit any questions you may have for Wilson. All right, so now I have the joy of introducing somebody I go back to undergrad with, Wilson. Sorry, it is now Dr. Wilson Okello. I can't help but to warmly refer to him as Wilson because he's always been a very humble, genuine, community-oriented, and personable mentor. When I first met Wilson as a freshman, he was a year ahead of me and served as a peer mentor on campus at Youngstown State University. And I remember meeting him and being in awe of a person so solidifying what it meant to be a peer mentor. Of course, freshmen were assigned different peer mentors, and we had the full roster of mentors available for detailed comparison, so we did. And I have vivid memories of the conversations with people desiring or bragging about having Wilson as their mentor. It appeared so natural for him. He was so fully himself, yet was able to grasp the individualism of each person he encountered and their varying perspectives. It was so powerful. The next year, I had the pleasure of serving as a student leader along with Wilson. Him a community advisor, me a resident advisor. I got to witness him flawlessly mentor students through numerous typical college student entanglements. He had a way with words and still has a way with words. I cannot tell you the countless people I still know and talk to this day from YSU who have such positive and fond memories of Wilson, so positive. There are very few people I can say this about. I have never heard a negative word spoken about Wilson. So it is no wonder he has now transitioned into a thought leader for higher education. Researching and speaking on topics such as Black feminist theory, anti-Blackness in education, critical qualitative inquiry, and creative methodologies to think about the health and survival of Black people in the afterlife of white supremacy. He joins us today to speak on decolonizing higher education. The impact that Wilson has on the community has been so real to witness, and I am excited to know that my UW community will have that opportunity to experience that authenticity and knowledge. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wilson Okello, Assistant Professor in the Watson College of Education at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Wilson, passing it off to you.
Christine, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
We could probably go home right after that. I mean, I don't deserve that type of introduction, but so humble to be able to just be in community with you all. Thank you again, just for this wonderful opportunity. Lift up your faces. You have a piercing need for this bright morning dawning for you. History, despite its wretched pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Lift up your eyes upon the day breaking before you give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it into the palms of your hands, mold it into the shape of your most private dream, sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Lift up your hearts. Each new hour holds new chances for new beginnings. Do not be wedded forever to fear or yoked eternally to brutishness. The horizon leans forward, offering us space to place new steps of change here on the pulse of this new day. May you have the courage to look up and out and upon the rock, the river, the tree, your country here on the pulse of this fine day. May you have the grace to look into your sister's eyes, to look upon your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning. And to you all at the University of Washington, I say good morning again. Thank you again, Christine, for that wonderful introduction. You are indeed a dear, dear friend. I'm so grateful that we've had the opportunity to journey together over these many years. Can you all again join me in wishing Christine a very happy birthday, who joined us for this time. Christine, you're a great thinker. You're an amazing professional. I remember you fondly just thinking about the ways in which you were always committed to community. You were able to bring people together in special ways, both then and as I'm learning now. So I'm grateful for the work that you continue to do. My late grandmother, Geraldine Lacey, she was born and she mothered in the height of Jim and Jane Crow America. She reminded me that more than what people say, people will show you who they are. I believe the same of organizations. They are constructions of people, of power and of choices. And if we can't do this work alone, if isolationism will continue to fail us as it always has, then we were going to need some people who work alongside us, who are committed to a common purpose, committed to a common cause. And to that regard, I want to thank you, Christine. I want to thank Ellen Whitlock Baker for the invitation. As I've watched you, Ellen, in your roles and had dialogue with you, I'm supportive and I'm encouraged by how you lead. Thank you, Amy and Rabia, Zoe, for all of your support in hosting this session, the entire planning team for the work you've done, not just this year, but what you've been doing over the past several years is truly, truly impressive. As I begin, I want to honor and acknowledge the land that we stand on as the traditional home of the Coast Salish people and the traditional home of all tribes and bands with the Duwamish, the Saquamish, Tulalip, and the Muckleshoot nations. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering and to this dialogue, particularly in Washington and Seattle. I ask that we take this as an opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land and those who are still with us here today. So if we could just take a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you for that. Land acknowledgements are one way that I believe that we can begin to pay this work forward. The meditation that I began with by Maya Angelou, I began there as I think about what it means to engage in the serious conversation of paying it forward. In order to do that, we must be willing to look back. One of the things I appreciate about poets and literary minds in general is their ability to chronicle the times, to present us with rich archives so that the past need not be out of touch with the patterns of our history, need not be out of touch with where we desire to go. And so in that regard, if I could borrow your attention for just a short time this morning, I would begin by taking you to East Africa. In 1983, and there we would find a woman named Leslie Scott. That year, Leslie Scott would launch a game at the London Toy Fair that would go on to be one of the best-selling games in the toy industry's history. In 2017, it was reported that this game has sold more than 80 million units worldwide, sustaining popularity among children and adults. Even if you don't actively play the game, I'm almost certain that you've heard of it. Some conceptualize this game as a building project. Scott conceptualized this game with her family in the 1970s using children's wooden blocks. The name thus derives from the Swahili term, which means to build. This game is played with 54 wooden blocks. Each block is 3 times as long as it is wide and is 1/5 as thick as its length. Blocks have small random variations in them to create imperfections in the stacking process, and this makes the game more challenging. The game, of course, as I'm sure many of you know, is called Jenga. That's right. It comes from the Swahili word kujenga. And as many of you know, the rectangular blocks are first stacked in layers of 3 blocks to build a tower. From there, players take turns removing blocks from anywhere under this top layer. Once removed, the block is then placed on the top layer, and the game continues until the tower falls, or any portion of the tower falls, the last person to successfully place a block on the top of the tower is declared the winner. It's been reported that the tallest Jenga tower was 40 2/3 levels high. For my mathematicians in this meeting room, that means that the tower was more than 2 times its original height. Now, again, born and raised in an East African home, my father was from Uganda, where my father, he intimately understood and was familiar with this game. We would play it all the time as a family. My older brother, my younger sister, and my mother, my parents, we would gather around the coffee table in the living room, and there we would take turns. We would try to construct this 18-story tower, 3 blocks at a time. We took great pride in engineering this tower. As if we were bricklayers, we would stack and we pressed each block together, each brick together, ensuring that there were no imperfections in the design. When we would often take a step back, we would admire our creation and wonder if we had ever seen something so magnificent. And then the game would start. If you recall, the purpose of this game was to build, right? As told by the designer. And the game, it was titled to build. By and large, my brother and my sister and my mother, we wanted to follow these rules, right? We resonated with the rules. We wanted to build something that was grand. We took great care. If the blocks made up 3 layers at a time, we would pull from the middle so that the layers still had something sturdy to stand on. My father, however, he had a different approach. While partially the goal was to win the game, I think we were invested in building a structure that could scrape heaven, if you will. My father wanted to do the opposite. See, much to our ire and confusion, he would look for what those in masonry might call the cornerstone, right? Or the block that is set first. The cornerstone is critical because all other stones are set in reference to this particular cornerstone. As my father understood it, if the cornerstone, it was significant because it could tell you about the integrity of a structure. If the cornerstone was placed incorrectly or was off in any way, then the tower was already compromised. Stay with me, I'm going somewhere. My father, he would pull these blocks from the base of the tower. Oftentimes he was successful. He would place it back on top, but the rest of us, see, we weren't so fortunate. See, once he pulled this block, the tower had a noticeable lean and sway, which typically meant that the next person to take a block and try to apply it to the top was probably going to lose, which would mean that my father was going to be the winner. My siblings and I would often look at this pile of rubble after the tower would fall, and we would shake our heads and feeling dejected. My mother would look at my father and say with puzzled disbelief, "Seraphim, why would you do that? Why do you continue to do that?" My father would simply laugh, and he would watch us rebuild this tower 3 blocks at a time. As you may notice, I said he would watch us. Yeah, I still have some unresolved feelings about this approach, as you can see, but I'm clear now about what was happening. See, I don't think that my father sought to destroy the structure. I think he wanted to win the game. I think he understood something that we didn't see. He knew that if your structure was fundamentally flawed, no matter how smooth its surface or how clean its edges might be, if and when it was provoked, it was going to collapse. See, perhaps he remembered that the wooden blocks all had imperfections in them that we couldn't see, and the towers that we took so much pride in were already compromised from the foundation. I can now confess that it was not my father who brought down these towers, but the towers were already preparing to fall. I didn't have the language for it at that particular time, but my father, he was teaching us something about racism and decolonization. See, racism is the coordination of legislative and economic policies, social norms, and cultural practices that function to minoritize and oppress non-white peoples. It cooperates with other systems and structures such as nativism and xenophobia to mark the other, right, in both the United States and a global context. Racial justice, thus, must critique, was dismantle, and must transform these systems and structures of white supremacy. Decolonization is all about unsettling, right, the past in distinct and unique ways. Our policies, our practices, like these wooden blocks in Jenga, are inherently flawed. And like my siblings, too many of us are interested in continuing to build on this shaky foundation, no matter how many times we've been told that it's not working. The answer for many of us is to tell people like my father that they can't play, that they can't participate because they fundamentally disrupt what we are trying to accomplish. Instead of staring at the rubble and rebuilding something new, something different, racial justice and decolonization seek to raise and critique the settler colonialism, and its material effects that have shaped our histories, shape our present, for both racialized people and indigenous peoples, right? How can we begin to sort of think in and through racial justice and decolonization to unsettle the past and to reinvent, to create new possibilities for where we want to be? I started off by telling you about my late grandmother, Geraldine Lacey. She had this politics of watchfulness. She was a mother of 9, and she has dozens of grandchildren and great grandchildren. I want you to know that she was deeply protective of her family. With her grandchildren, nobody was good enough for her grandbabies, as she might say. She was oftentimes the voice of authority, symbolic if nothing else. But when it came to partnerships and marriage and things like that, folks would run by her what they thought, right? I can remember my cousin introducing their partner at the time to my grandmother. My grandmother, she held a warm but a very deliberate sense about her. She would often lead with a simple question: what are your intentions? That was it. What are your intentions? And then she would wait and she would watch. Now, I've heard rumors. I was small at the time, so I've heard rumors about some of her frank but her accurate assessments that were bound to this question of intentionality. I don't know this to be true, but it seemed like for Grandma Lacey, if somebody wasn't clear or was unclear about their intentions, then they could not value something as deeply as they might otherwise profess. I'll say it differently. If someone was only responding to her question in the moment, right, without a substantive and inclusive vision for what tomorrow might look like, or the next day, or next week, or a year from now, then the person, their vision was most likely just about them and not about their partner. See, Grandma wasn't a let's wait and see type of person. She understood that someone's life could be wrapped up in someone else's decision-making. And so as far as she was concerned, she was going to say something about what she observed, this politics of watchfulness as an unrelenting vigilance, to be keenly observant. I've often wondered where these politics were shaped from. I suspect for her, it comes from being a Black woman, broadly understood, and indigenous people of color. Their lives and experiences are replete with broken promises, with half-truths, with encouragements to be patient, the incomplete and conciliatory gestures that masquerade as opportunities of uplift or gradualism, things that say that we are trying, right? Or just give us some time. We are working on it. This is not to suggest that processes should be immediate. They're not. That's not what I'm suggesting. But in many instances, this language of wait, of gradualism, can oftentimes mean never, right? And she had to be watchful because unsubstantiated optimism might mean harm or danger for herself or for her community, right? And so she taught us about what it means to be watchful of people and to be watchful of policies, because she knew, right? She knew that for some people and for organizations, they know the language of progress, right? They know it. They know how to speak the language of progress. Some folks are so rehearsed in the language of anti-Blackness that in the flip of their tone, they can wield whiteness and state-sanctioned authority on behalf of whiteness. Building on my grandmother's wisdom, I want to suggest to you this morning that we ought not to be flattered by the proliferation of statements that are coming across. Every department, every university has a statement, or some of the name changes, while dynamic and so important, they're important in and of themselves. They are not racial justice. They are not decolonization. Again, I'm pleased that Washington, D.C.'s football team is finally changing its name after 80 plus years. I'm pleased that Princeton is removing Woodrow Wilson's name, right? I won't lose a bit of sleep because of some of the Confederate monuments that are coming down and being relocated. But when folks tell the story of the moment, we need to make sure that the version that we're talking about is correct, right? And that for decades, folks have been calling for these rightful acts of civility. And for decades, they've been ignored. We need not forget that students and citizens were arrested for taking down flags, right? For pulling down racist monuments, only to have them raised back up. Communities have been calling for these changes for year after year, which might lead some of us to surmise that what we are witnessing is really just a response or the intersection of guilt, overt racism, and a politics of activism, right? So beyond the sincerity of words, I hope some of you will have a Geraldine Lacey type of spirit that says, what are your intentions beyond the moment? What are our intentions? Because if we can get past the what, I believe as Yang calls on us to do, that we can begin to ask the how, and how is only a question that you ask if you are concerned with the mechanisms and not just the motives, right? To be clear, decolonization involves no less than the rematriation of land, anti-racist and anti-colonial practices that would restore the life and futures of Black and Indigenous people of color, right? The futures that they were meant to follow. To that end, decolonization, in our sincerest attempt, represents at best an existential crisis for the university, represents at best an existential crisis when we think about what it means for the work of advancement and philanthropy. My goal in this time, the short time that I have left, is not to resolve this colonial dilemma. Indeed, it is huge, it's big, and we don't have time for that for today. But I want us to consider how we might commit to an analysis of our work that makes space for racialized futures and Indigenous sovereignty, for us to examine what our intentions are for Black, Indigenous people of color, how we might co-construct, right, institutions for Black and Indigenous people of color. We are never as steeped in history as when we pretend not to be. But if we can stop pretending, we may gain in understanding what we lose in a false sense of innocence. I say all that to say that, yes, we have done good work. The University of Washington is doing good work. I love these summer sessions that have been going on for the past several years. Your faculty development initiatives are important and powerful. I was glad to read about the race and the equity initiative that was launched several years ago by your president and staff. But if the University of Washington is going to be true to the reckoning that I believe is happening in this historical moment, it's going to require an interruption of how we do our work, right? From an anti-racist and decolonizing set of principles, right? Using that as a frame for our work. What do you mean? I'm so glad that you asked. If we're going to interrupt our normal, I believe we need to submit ourselves to 4 fundamental questions. Those 4 fundamental questions. Number 1, who is this for? In other words, who is my work for? Number 2, how am I positioned? Number 3, what power do I have? And number 4, what am I willing to give up? Number 1, who is this for? Number 2, how am I positioned? Number 3, what power do I have? And number 4, what am I willing to give up? For this first question, who is this for? In other words, who is my work for? We need to sort of think about what it means for us to pay this work forward, and who are we considering when we think about our work. My sense is that for many of us in the room, we've had fairly decent encounters with the educational institution, right? With educational institutions, with the idea of higher education in general. Hopefully that's a safe assumption, right? We believe in their capacity to transform lives. I believe that these are good things, right? But I believe that we can be doing better. right? I believe in the potential of institutions, but I believe that against what I know is a glaring reality for non-white, for racialized, indigenous peoples. I meet and I work with students who tell me, who write about, who come back to work and teach at universities, not because they've had overly positive experiences, but because there were gaps along the way in their experience. If we ask our students, what is their relationship with the institution and its stakeholders, what was it like during their experience? I suspect that we might hear something that might trouble us. Let me be clear, I'm not asking individuals what they liked about their relationship to education. I got a call from in an advancement office at one of my alma maters last week, I believe. And they were asking what I liked about the university, what I love, what drove me to the university. Those things are important questions to ask, but this is not the question I'm asking. I'm asking us to think about what their relationship to education was like. We need not look any further than some of the mental health sort of crisis issues that begin that are here and have always been present, but that are hovering over our nation in this particular time. Many of the students that we're thinking about, right, are simply trying to get through the university, get through their educational experience with some semblance of sanity. They will tell you about the hostility that they experienced. They will tell you about the racism that they had to negotiate every single day. I write about this notion of racial battle fatigue, and it might alarm you to hear how people of color, how professionals of color have to navigate racial battle fatigue on a daily basis. Don't take my word for it. We can look across history and we can see the ways that people of color have put their life on the line so that institutions might change. We can look at Arkansas in 1957 and we would find Elizabeth Eckford and 8 other students known as the Little Rock Nine as they tried to integrate Central High School. We can look at Greensboro, North Carolina on February 1st, 1960 as 4 students took a seat at Woolworth's lunch counter. We can look at East Los Angeles in 1968 and we would find hundreds of Chicano students who staged a walkout, right, because of the treatment of their institution. We can look at the University of Missouri in 2014 and Jonathan Butler, who staged a hunger strike just so the university might be willing to listen differently, and then they graduate, right? They show up, or I should say we show up, and we ask to be in a relationship with them, right? The same institution that in essence caused them grief and harm, that institution, right, that couldn't see them during their experience wants something from them. My question for us to wrestle with is, why would these students want to be in a relationship with you? Why do you believe that racially minoritized students, indigenous folks will be interested in being part of an organization or institution that routinely encroached on their sense of well-being? If we're being honest, right? So much of the work that we do is for many or for students who look most like the people in this meeting, who look most like the people on our college campuses, who look most like the University of Washington, right? If we are serious about advancing education for all students, we have to think seriously about how our efforts can engage these students before and during their schooling experience. If we are unwilling to participate, to share in their very pain, we have no right to ask for their successes. We have no right to ask for their rewards. Who is this work for? The second question is important. It asks, how am I positioned? This question asks us to think about the ways in which our identities are playing out on college campuses, in departments, in our meetings every single day because of racist policies and practices, because of colonization and settler colonialism that we're all a part of. I'm a part of that we all have some proximity to whiteness, right? Whereas whiteness represents the ways that society is organized. What is our relationship to whiteness given our particular identities? A student wrote to me several weeks ago. She said, "Hi, Dr. Okello. In light of the current protests and movements going on around the country, I want to make sure that I do the right thing and I take a stand for equality. I want to ensure that I do it in the correct manner in order to prevent offending anyone, but I also want to do something to help and not remain silent. I know I will never understand what it is like to be Black. This is coming from a white woman. And I know that your class taught me so much that I've been able to pass on to others. I don't think I realized how naive I was on the matter of race inequality in our country until I took your class. I guess the overall purpose of me writing is to first check in on you and to let you know how much I value your opinion. And secondly, to ask for your guidance on how I can educate myself more in turn, I should say, educate those around me on how to best support the cause. I've seen lots of posts on social media, but I know that all of that is limited in effect if we don't put that into action. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you're staying healthy and well. I appreciated this email because, and even knowing this student, what I'm hearing, what I read in this email is a desire to hope, but I also read someone who is wrestling with her identity as a white woman and what it means for her to participate in this work of racial justice and decolonization. It's important that we do this self-work. Folks want to jump into action, I think, in this particular moment. I think that is important, right? And I want to come back to that. That's important, but we need to be willing to engage in the self-work, to explore our own relationship to whiteness, to white privilege. How have we benefited from systems of oppression and other intersectional areas of oppression? To do this work, you need to become sort of knowledgeable, or to gain some type of proficiency around these dimensions of difference that Jamie Washington might call. Or we need to be aware of what cycles of oppression and socialization are. We need to have some language around that that Bobby Harwell talks about. We need to spend some time thinking about our intentions. Are we involved simply to resolve our guilt, our shame, or are we involved because we are concerned about the welfare of the individuals we say we care about? I want to challenge us to invest in this process of community. Whiteness, as an institution, it trains us to skip the process and go straight to outcomes. I know, again, we have so much to accomplish and we want to jump straight to outcomes, but we need to think about what it means to invest in community, right? To build community that can support each other, to hold each other accountable, right? To think about what it means to be along in a team. I want you to just take 5 seconds. I want you to think about your circle right now. Think about your community. Who can push you to be better? Who is pushing you in your community to be better along the lines of racial justice, of anti-racism, of decolonization? Just take 5 seconds. Who's pushing you to be better? For some of you, that was easy, and I know that's a quick 5 seconds, but for some of you, that's easy, right? But for some of us, it means that it might mean that we need to expand our community, right? We need to add or come into community with others who are doing the work, who will push us, who will lovingly make us uncomfortable, right? You're gonna experience resistance on this journey to liberation, but that resistance, or that feeling of resistance that you might feel, it just means that you're in the right place. Remember, again, that whiteness as an institution, it forces us to remain at the level of discussion, of structure, of timeframes, of agendas. We need to get this done by fall 2020. We need to get this done by fall 2021. We need to get out of this state of imperfection and just begin the process. Right? And we begin a process by doing some of the self-work, by investing in community. Can we ask ourselves, right, personally and as an organization, how we have benefited from whiteness, from white privilege, from colonization, right? Where have I ignored racism in my life, right? To be clear, this isn't this sort of Trayvon Martin generation that Elizabeth and Alexander talks about isn't new, right? This Breonna Taylor moment isn't new. This George Floyd moment isn't new. What is it that provokes us in this moment to engage in these conversations, to do it differently? We need to wrestle with that. How can we move from colluding in a system of racism to taking responsibility, right? we need to engage in some of this self-work. Who is this work for? How am I positioned? Number 3, what power do you have? Alice Walker, she reminds us that the most common way that we give up our power is by thinking that we don't have any. Power is simply the ability to shape reality. I believe that we all have power, irrespective of the energy we might spend contending that we are powerless. As Malcolm X often reminds us, that the most critical issue facing people is this lack of a radical imagination. He goes on to explain that people have sentenced themselves to a way of thinking and strategizing that is either accepted, advised, or approved. Said differently, we've given in to what some people might call a false consciousness. So we believe only in things that seem attainable or within reason. This false consciousness, it severely impedes our ability to move through the world with any sort of agency or authority, because we're always seeking the go-ahead to do and be the things that seem attainable. Right? I think we're programmed in many ways to seek a level of comfort in this nation. And that severely, again, impedes our ability to act on our own agency. When we can take our agency, infuse it with a power that we have, I believe that we can do the extraordinary. Take Elizabeth Alexander, for example, as president of the Mellon Foundation. She recently stated that the foundation will not issue a cent to potential funders, individuals who are pursuing funding unless, right, their goals are have a particular social justice agenda, right? What does it mean for her to pursue social justice through humanity and the arts? They're not allocating a cent unless it has a specific agenda geared around social justice. How might we be able to, right, if we're serious about the work of racial justice and decolonization, how might we be able to work within our institutions, our departments, to rewrite missions if necessary, to reimagine our values if necessary, to say that this institution as a whole is not just going to talk about what it means to do the work, but our process will not invest in things that do not. What does it mean for us to engage in that type of work? To this end, I want to offer you several questions that were sort of curated by Dr. D.L. Stewart out of the Colorado State University. He offers us a powerful reframing of institutional sort of questioning. And Rabia, if you could you put up that slide? You could put up your slide at this particular moment. But Dr. Stewart offers us several questions to consider. The first of those questions asks, or was really sort of thinking about, what does it mean for us to think about diversity and inclusion versus equity and justice, right? Diversity asks, who's in the room, right? Equity responds, who is trying to get in the room but can't? Whose presence in the room is under constant threat of erasure? Diversity asks, how many more, right, pick your minoritized identity group, do we have in our department or in our institution than we had, say, last year, right? Equity responds, what conditions have we created that maintain certain groups as they are perpetually majority here? Diversity celebrates increases in numbers that still reflect minoritized status on campus and incremental growth. Equity celebrates reductions in harm, right? Revisions to abusive systems and increases in supports for people's life chances as reported by those who have been targeted. Inclusion asks, has everyone's ideas been heard? Justice responds, whose ideas won't be taken seriously because they aren't in the majority? Inclusion asks, is this environment safe for everyone to feel like they belong? Justice challenges us to ask whose safety is being sacrificed and minoritized to allow others to be comfortable maintaining and dehumanizing views, right? Calling us to think about how we can imagine the line of questioning that leads so many of our effort, that leads our departments. Who is this work for? How am I positioned? What power do I have? This final question I'll leave you with this morning is, what are you willing to give up? If we were to canvass history, we would find people at countless points of departure. Speaking truth to power, let me be clear, doesn't come from surplus, it comes from sacrifice. Don't talk to me about giving something up if you aren't willing to put something on the line. Nina Simone, a sultry singer from North Carolina, I'm sure you know about. She dreamed of being this classical pianist. Her training coalesced with her unique gifting would catapult her into the hearts and the ears of music enthusiasts, known for her deep, her earthy and rich personal arrangements. Simone would utilize her space and influence to compose music that, as she notes, reflected the times. Right, those close to her would say that Simone, she could take a piece of music and literally morph it into experience. Simone, however, would become disillusioned by the hollowness of this popularity and the bright lights, and she wrestled with anger regarding the condition of minoritized people, particularly racialized Black people, lucidly and passionately proclaiming once that freedom is no fear. I mean, really, no fear. If I could but live half my life. Those in her camp said she would become difficult to book because she would not stop speaking out. Who is this for? How am I positioned? What power do I have? What am I willing to give up? At the 1968 Olympics, I'm sure you know the story, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and Peter Norman, they became symbols of political struggle in this portrait of open defiance. After finishing first, second, and third in the 200-meter dash, these athletes did the unimaginable with their heads bowed during the national anthem. Smith, with a black glove on his right hand, he raised his fist to the sky. Carlos, with a black glove on his left hand, he raised his fist to the sky. Norman, the white athlete, he stood in solidarity with these two athletes and wore the Olympic badge of human rights on his jacket. This act was seen as a deliberate breach of the Olympic spirit, but according to Smith and Carlos, how could we be celebrated on this podium while at home our people suffer? All of the athletes would face consequences. Smith and Carlos were suspended from their team. They were expelled from Olympic Village. They were sent home as an embarrassment to their country for the rest of their life. They would occupy, or for the rest of their lives to this day even, they would occupy this precarious position of individuals who could have had it all the fame, all the riches, all the glory, all the records, but they opted for this place of push. They opted for this place of the borderlands, if you will. Who is this for? How are you positioned? What power do you have? What are you willing to give up? I don't promise that any of these questions, any of these recommendations will be easy, but I'm persuaded that this is the type of work that is necessary, that this, if we are lucky, can move us closer to doing the work of racial justice and decolonization. It can move us closer to doing less harm, to supporting the very students that we say that we care so much about. And with that, I'm so, again, thank you all so much for the opportunity to join you all. I'm happy to discuss questions that you all might have, but I'll turn it back over to you, Christine. Thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you, Wilson. That was powerful, I think. And as I stated, you have always been wonderful with words. So that was, I think, amazing to hear and very well stated. As a reminder, Amy just put the thought exchange link in the chat. Please feel free to use that. And I will kick us off with one question that has already been submitted. So, University of Washington advancement and the university as a whole is a predominantly white space and institution. Acknowledge that, have shared that. And as a part of that, white people have white privilege and white niceness that does harm to Black and Indigenous people. So how can they own that today? So you said own it today, but then think about the future. So how can, as a predominantly white institution, people go about fixing that harm or addressing that harm?
Yeah, no, I think it's such an important question. And so I highlight this notion of doing the self-work because again, I think we oftentimes, we see the issue and believe that we want to sort of jump right to outcomes, right? Or sort of the moment is calling on us to do something. Individuals feel a particular pressure, if not from the university, from students, from stakeholders, from the community writ large, from the social, political, and cultural sort of moment. They feel the need to do something. But I would encourage every one of us, again, to think about what is our proximity to whiteness, right? How have we benefited from sort of whiteness? How have others perhaps been disproportionately affected in my sphere of influence at the place that I work, right? If we could think about our relationship to whiteness in a different way, if we can think about how we have been complicit in some of the ways in which our organization has functioned, then I believe that we can begin to sort of think about what larger outcomes might be. But I don't think we can do that unless we are sort of willing to be honest about how we have all sort of been participants in sort of advancing settler colonialism and advancing this notion really the moment that we're in. And so I would call on us all to sort of think about what are some of the commitments and self-work that we can begin to do. Secondly, I mentioned this notion of investing in community. And so whether that might be sort of challenging who we're connected to, right? Or investing in a particular type of training on our own so that we can be in community with individuals. There are plenty of social justice sort of institutes that are being sort of launched and have, long-standing commitments in our professional organizations and in community endeavors. Again, and learning so much about Seattle, hearing about the tremendous work, what would it mean to attend these meetings, not for work, right? Not to hear about, or to make a pitch, but simply to be in community with these individuals, to demonstrate that I am invested in what happens to you all, invested in what happens to these communities. So I would challenge us again to do the self-work and then to think about what it means to invest in our own communities. And as I believe, as we do that, when we come to the table, right, in the proverbial tables that are going to exist at every institution or Zoom meetings, whatever they might be, right, then we'll come with a different sort of preparation, with a different type of language to engage. I hope that answers the question.
And another question, so advancement, they work a lot with faculty in their different departments. So how do our advancement colleagues engage faculty in this work and follow their lead while also carving out advancement's own progress? Advancement knows they need to let faculty drive meaningful change, but they use it also as an excuse to not make changes. And again, just fall in that comfort.
Well, if we're talking about what it means to consider communities that have been overlooked, then perhaps there's a lessening of egos, that needs to happen both amongst faculty and amongst advancement professionals. And when I say sort of ego, I'm thinking about how we come to the table as wanting to do something or wanting to accomplish something. How can we sort of interrupt that line of questioning to think about what do the students require? What do they need from us, right? And what roles can faculty play or apply, approach? How might they be able to approach this in a different way, than advancement professionals might be able to do so? I'm learning that, continuously learning that at the university that I believe we all have a heart, again, for students. I think we all, because of the ways our positions are constructed, we just all care about them differently, right? Or we have, so I believe that faculty are invested in students. I believe that advancement professionals are invested in students. And how can we, if we are, again, if it's mostly about these individuals, these communities, how can we get out of the way and allow the student-led initiative to be the driver of our practice, right? Which is uncomfortable for many of us, right? Who are perceived as experts, right? Or people call us experts all the time, or, where we operate, where we like bringing it, we do the work, right? But how can we get out of the way and allow the need, right? Or the desire to be the driving force of our community and not the other way?
Great. And I don't know if you had an opportunity to attend the previous session, Wilson, but it touched on racial equity in a larger org. And a part of that conversation talked about accountability and that needing to come from leadership. And a question that was just submitted that I think is really good is, how can we thoughtfully call in white people in leadership to give up a bit of their seat at the table to make racial change? How can we call in this leadership, white men and women, and hold them accountable? And I think that's a great overlap when we think about decolonizing higher education.
Right, right. I mean, it's such an important question in this moment. And I think about all of the ways that students are calling on us to essentially get our act together, right, as university stakeholders and officials, right? And so this becomes much less about, a director, a chancellor, or anyone else's agenda. And again, if we're serious about the work of unsettling some of these long-standing, settler colonial and racist practices, then it's going to require us all to give up something. And if we're not interested in doing that work, then we need not talk about racial justice. We need not talk about decolonization. Don't put out a statement. Don't put out, whatever it is, the town halls, right? Because it all becomes performative in that degree. And so I believe that if you're not serious about, serious about engaging the hard work of letting something go, right? Power of allocating resources, then we need to talk about there's something else, right? Because that is not the work of racial justice or decolonization. And so I wonder how individuals also can be, in terms of accountability, in this moment, how can we call on individuals to set up an infrastructure that allows for continuous feedback, right? And so such that individuals don't have the leeway to not follow through, right? Or to not provide updates, or to not be able to respond to individuals, or some of the proposals that are going forward. So one of the things I've been doing is I'm holding on to every statement that has been released at our university. I'm holding on to the chancellor's statement. I'm holding on to our dean's statement. I'm holding on, as a program and department, certainly we're putting out those things. But I plan to show up month after month and to say, you remember when you wrote this, right? Let's talk about how we're making progress on those things. And I intend to do the same thing with my students, right? With our program, with our department, to say, these are the things that we talked about, right? Some of us before, but as a department, collectively, this is what we said we were about, what we're going to commit to. How can we use what's already there, what many folks have already put out as sort of here's what we want to hold you accountable to, and how might we begin to sort of follow up on that? So I would say it might not be a sort of a reinventing so much as let's take the resources that are already sort of been put forth, and let's stay accountable to these things. And then I think for individuals, if we're going to do this work, you need to have individuals who are invested in the process, right? Which is going to mean resistance. It's going to mean change. It's going to mean no's, and it's going to mean some yeses, right? It's not going to be sort of yes across the board, but how can we begin to sort of, what are our intentions beyond sort of just the moment? And I think if we can ask that question, it'll lead to sort of longer standing institutional change that I think folks are calling for.
To follow up on that, you know, how do you get comfortable in the somebody's telling you be patient, we're working on it. You know, it's like they put out this statement, you're trying to hold them accountable a month later, but it's like, no, we're working on it, we haven't forgotten, just, you know, right. Be patient.
Yeah, honestly, it becomes less about how I feel about it, and I point to the pressing need of our students who have been calling for it, right? So this has nothing, so my discomfort, it pales in comparison to the harm that is perpetually done to our students, or perpetually done, again, when I read or, you know, engage in research, and I hear about these stories of fatigue and exploitation and all these things that are taking place. That's my priority, not me, right? And so it would be hard, right, if it was sort of just about sort of my emotionality. But this, for me, is not about emotions. This is about how individuals are experiencing something that I'm a part of, right? And if I'm a part of it, then I have a responsibility. I believe we have a responsibility as stakeholders to continue to push it to be better.
Awesome, that's powerful. And I think, yeah, like you said, truth to power comes from sacrifice. So I think that's a continuous pattern that we need to push ourselves. What are we willing to sacrifice? What can we do? And I guess following along with that, and we have, you know, a few minutes left, how do we get comfortable and less adverse to that loss of our current norms, you know, within ourselves?
Yeah. I think that's a really important question. You know, and I think about, there's been this question of normal. And I'm coming to that question, but yeah. And so in a circular way, I've been thinking about this question of normal and what our ideas of getting back to a normal, particularly in what a post-COVID normal might be. And for most individuals, it's sort of getting back to the way things were, or being in community, or being able to sort of do the things that we aren't able to do in this moment. And then I think about what was the normal before COVID for so many people, right? I think about how individuals were continuously, the harm they incurred before COVID. I think about some of the injustice, right, that was happening before COVID. I think about some of the trauma that individuals were negotiating from day to day before COVID. And I asked myself, like, what are individuals trying to get back to? Like, what type of normal are we trying to get back to? And so, you know, as we interrupt this notion of normal, I think we need to sort of reckon with the idea that normal has not meant the same thing for everybody, right? And so if we could think about as normal as perpetually unsettling for so many people and so many lives, then perhaps our normal should change, right? Perhaps there shouldn't be a such thing as, our sense of normal so much as, how can we begin to sort of right some of the injustices that have literally been sort of the sin and stain of our nation. I think about what we thought, or what was sort of projected, or what pundits and sort of people talked about was impossible, right, 7 months ago, right? We couldn't think holistically about a living wage for everybody. We couldn't think holistically about healthcare. We couldn't think holistically about some of these issues sort of post-COVID, but now when everyone is affected, when the most privileged among us are affected, all of a sudden, we can, we see, checks are rolled out to supplement, lost income, or there's conversations about healthcare, right? There's a different type of conversation that's happening. And so, which again leads me to question sort of where was this, right? Was it really that the task was impossible, or did we simply just not want to do it, right? And I'm leaning toward the latter. And so as I think about that latter, interrupting our normal has to become, again, less about our own conveniences, less about our own comforts, and more about how we can again, sort of right and begin to sort of challenge some of the longstanding systemic issues that have plagued our country.
And I can't believe our time is quickly ending, but I want to keep hearing from you. But I actually want to fit in one more question. So a lot of the past couple of sessions have been focused on white staff and leadership, but I think it's important. Is there any advice to our staff of color you have in this moment as you think about
protect your energy? Yes, please. Protect your energy. Protect your spirit. Please take care of yourself, right? So some of this work, again, people of color have been leading this charge for decades, right? And in many ways, they're being called to the table in a different type of way, right? As meetings are happening, individuals are being, are all of a sudden being summoned for their expertise or to offer a particular experience that we're missing, if you will, or, all these sorts of initiatives are now sort of being laid out that sort of include a perspective that has always been there, right? But has long been ignored. And so you have a right to say no, right? Protect your spirit and, contribute when and where and how you decide, right? Because if we're being honest, right? White supremacy is not altruistic, right? It's not going to sort of have this sort of wake up and let's right the ship, if you will, right? It's going to take time. And as individuals, as sort of institutions are working that out, people of color, again, will have to bear the unpaid labor, will have to bear the brunt, will have to bear sort of the being asked to wait, or the patience, right, that has oftentimes been incurred upon them. And so, again, my message to you, please think about your spirit, to think about conserving your energy, and to do the work that you feel compelled to do, and not the other way around.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for spending time with us. I'm grateful to have known you for as long as I have, and I'm thankful that you've been able to come to our UW community and impart such beautiful thoughts. So
I appreciate it, and hope it was helpful. If I can be a resource and just a thought partner, as you all move forward, please let me know. I'm grateful again for you, Christine, and the work that you're doing. Thank you all for these sessions that you're doing. I wish you all well, and again, I'm happy to be in community with you all as you move forward.
All right. Thank you, Wilson. Thank you, everybody.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are so excited for our final session of Engagement Summer Session, which I can't believe we're on to our last one. But I have the pleasure of introducing my boss, which is always a fun thing to do. But actually working with Ellen Whitlock-Baker at Alumni and Stakeholder Engagement is an absolute delight. She has been stewarding the CROs, the Constituent Relations Officers, for a long time, and has really built our engagement platform and the units in a spectacular way. She also is figuring out the way of how do we measure what is being done in the engagement space, which is not an easy thing to do. But I think Ellen had the opportunity to go meet Patricia and Clarabelle to figure out how to do this work well. And I think a lot of the things that she has learned, she's bringing back to us, and she's also bringing back Patricia and Clarabelle. So I'm very excited to toss this over to Ellen to have her kick off our last session.
Thank you, Amy. So kind of you. And as most of you know, I could not do any of my work without Amy. So she's half of the team here. It's so great to see you all for this final session. As Amy said, I was lucky enough to be able to visit both UCLA and Duke this last year before we couldn't fly anywhere anymore. And I met Patricia and Clarabelle in person and was able to talk deeply with them about the work that they do at their universities, engaging alumni of color and engaging alumni by identity groups. And they both really stood out to me as just doing this work so well and being so thoughtful about the way they go about doing it. And what's exciting about the digital nature of Engagement Summer Session this year is that we could actually hear from them when normally we wouldn't have been able to fly them out. So it's really spectacular to be able to be here in conversation with them. And we really were thoughtful about wanting to end with this particular session because we want to give us all some very practical takeaways, and we wanted to speak with our peers who are doing this work well so that we keep this in a place that is not theoretical, but that is action oriented. And so I hope we can all go into this session with that thought, and we will definitely look forward to following up, especially with CROs, but others in the days to come, on how we can take everything we've learned over these 6 sessions and put them into practice, put things into practice and change. So without further ado, let's get to the most important people on this call. I'm really delighted to introduce 2 wonderful women. First, Patricia Nguyen, who's the Senior Director of Diversity Programs at UCLA, who has for the past 10 years served in multiple roles in multicultural affairs, diversity and inclusion work in higher education, ranging from intercultural living and learning communities, multicultural Greek life, summer bridge programs, multicultural centers, and social justice education. And also Claribel Peguero, who's the Senior Director for Volunteer Engagement at Duke University. Dr. Peguero has over 20 years in higher education administration, started her work with students, and now is in the alumni space. In her current position at Duke, she's responsible for volunteer engagement of over 16,000 alumni, which includes creating and developing processes and procedures with the goal of improving efficiency and the overall experience. You can see why we get along. So I'm going to have Patricia and Claribel give each of you just a quick snapshot of their institutions so you can understand the difference in size and scope and similarity to UW, which I think helps us set the context, and also say anything they want to say, and then we'll get into some questions. So Claribel, why don't we kick it off with you?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ellen, Amy, and Rabia for putting this together. It's always humbling to know that the work that you're doing is so well received, not just on your campus and with alumni, but with other colleagues. So thank you so much. We are hoping that this is as engaging as possible, so please feel free to ask us questions throughout, because we aren't the experts. We just happen to do this and are blessed to be acknowledged for our work. So thank you. Duke University, people think it's huge because of its basketball program. And so we have about 7,000 undergrads, and then we double when it comes to our graduate, professional, and schools and units. So now we have actually become more of a 51% graduate, professional, schools and units. So that's something to know and to highlight. My boss, she's a graduate of the class of 1983, and when she graduated, 98% of her class was white with her. So that's what it looked like in 1983. And today our students are over 52% are considered students of color. So we have a large Asian American population. Second is our Black students, and then we have Latinos, and then Native American students continue to grow in numbers, which is wonderful to see that. So you have to recognize that as we're working with alumni, for a lot of the volunteers, especially in the 80s and 90s, it's not the same school that they're used to. It's a whole conversation that you need to have. And then you have to work with students that possibly didn't have a wonderful experience. And now we're trying to have them have this nostalgia for an institution and want to give back. And so that's really what my work is like. I work with all of our affinity groups, so not just identity-based, but also interest-based. So it could be a fraternity and sorority, or the band. I think about the band very fondly and their work. So I do interest as well as affinity groups. As far as affinity groups, we have 4 that are chartered, which means that they get staff support. And that's our Black alumni, our Latino alumni. We just created our Asian alumni group. And our LGBTQ plus group has been around for a while. Things to know is that it was hard to not have an Asian Alliance group. When I started 4 years ago, we didn't have one. And it was because of how much people were saying how hard it would be to start. And so I do hope that today we can talk about how do we remove those barriers, you're going to hear a lot. There's going to be a lot of advice on what to do and not to do. But if you come at it from the most positive lens that you can, then you'll be successful. And you'll hear from people along the way. But I think that in our journey in creating the Asian Alliance, we heard a lot. But I stood strong because I knew it was important that we had it. And so you could imagine it was the question about South Asian versus Asian, international, Southeast Asian, you know, where did it all fall in? So we got a lot of questions about that, but proud to say that a year later, it's a phenomenal group that really has impacted our alumni group. So I'll stop there and then I'll let Patricia go and look forward to the questions.
Good morning or good afternoon almost, everyone. I would like to echo Clarabelle's statement around sort of expressing gratitude in terms of people to making space for this important conversation that is not only timely, but unfortunately timeless, given sort of the pervasiveness of racism. So I just want to acknowledge that. I hope that this has been one of many conversations and more to follow. To give you a little bit of context about UCLA, we enroll about 44,000 students at one time, and our alumni population is about 500,000. For a school that just celebrated 100 years, we're a relatively large alumni community, and we have contact with about, I'd say, 60 to 70% of them in terms of valid emails and valid addresses. So that gives you sort of a context of the outreach piece. I am very lucky, and it's been a while since we've been able to do this, but we've been actually able to look at our data, and so about 25% of our alumni identify as from a racial ethnic minority. And in the first 5 years of my time, we went from about 300 self-identified LGBT folks to about 3,300, and we can talk about how we got those numbers there. In terms of networks, we have quite a few, because the nature of being a public institution is there's a lot of grassroots activity. So our student organizations number almost over 1,000. So if it translates into the alumni side, we have about 96 regional networks that are based on where folks live. We have our interest groups like the band and our newspaper. And then I am very fortunate to be the guide on the side for 10 identity-based networks. So most of them, I think you all can think about in terms of the census, right? In terms of racially how you identify. We have disaggregated Pacific Islanders separate from our Asian alumni. We have a strong Filipino community here, so they actually have their own here to help you build the numbers. And the ones that we're actually extremely proud of is we were the first institution to have started an undocumented alumni association and a multiracial one. And those have been award-winning entities, and they have created a template for a lot of nations, national kind of practices. We also have a Muslim group too, that actually was part of a nationwide effort from the Muslim community. As most Muslim student associations were turning 50 or older, they also started alumni associations. We're a little more than half identify as women, still working on the different gender identification within our system. And aside from that, I work specifically with about 120 volunteers that lead the 10 networks. I also have a full-time staff team of four full-time staff just dedicated to diversity alone. It includes a graduate assistant to make number 5 and some student interns. So in addition to working with UCLA, I also help lead the diversity efforts for the UC-wide system as well. So thinking about all our sister campuses, that's something that we're engaged with here at UCLA.
That's awesome, Patricia. I think we're all drooling over your 4 full-time staff. Clarabelle, if I'm remembering correctly, you have 3 on your team, is that correct?
There's 2 of us.
2,
yeah, with a lot of dotted line reports, but yeah.
I think our General Alumni Association is about 70 staff, so
yeah.
we're 4 out of
4 out of 70. Yeah, that's so interesting. UCLA is definitely our public peer, so we hold ourselves a lot to looking at how UCLA is doing things, and so that's one of the big reasons I wanted Patricia here. But then Clarabelle, I think that one of the interesting things about Duke is the graduate student majority of that alumni population, and a lot of you folks on this call represent graduate schools, and so that's a really different way to engage with alums. The graduate student alumni has a different relationship with their university and often more with their unit that they graduated from, like the business school, than with the university as a whole. Claribel, do you want to talk about that at all in terms of how you hook grad students into engaging post-graduation as opposed to undergrads?
It's probably the easiest, because we recognize that once a graduate student decides on Duke, then they really are using the whole name and the network. And so there's this level of love and connection that they already have, which is wonderful. We work really closely with our schools and units to make sure that we are in lockstep in the work that we're doing, making sure that if there's a regional event that they know about it, that they know who's attending and all of those things. But we have found that we have really connected with our graduate students, and they want to participate in our affinity groups in numbers, and they want to serve as leaders as well, which is absolutely fascinating to see that. So it brings a unique approach. Our doula group, one of the co-chairs is actually a EMBA student. So he never even came to campus until working with our Latino alumni group. So that was fascinating walking around with him. I'm like, oh, wow, you missed this whole experience. So I think we're used to it. We enjoy having the variety of voices and connection. And a lot of them share what their undergrads are doing. So they'll forward information to us. So that's always very, very helpful. Now in the world that we're in today, I just got off a call with all of the graduate units, because now the emphasis on affinity group programming and racial justice programming is now heightened. It's a university mandate. The president has written a letter saying that we need to do 5 things. And so now they're all like, I probably was the most popular person at Duke for a minute, because now everyone really is like, what do we do? How do we do it? So there will be a spirit of collaboration, but a lot of it will be work that we're already doing that they kind of just join us in doing. So it's exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to get into some of the work that you're doing now, and I'd love some examples of how we could get started on some of this work. But I want to talk first about where it begins, which is working with the students. So both of you have, I believe, staff members who work directly with students and work really carefully with the student population to bring them into the alumni population and to bring them into leadership roles in these identity groups or in any affinity group. Patricia, you want to talk a little bit more about that? Or both of you, I'd love to hear more about how you do that, and then how, like, the results you see from that activity and how you get students to trust you.
I think definitions are actually important, right? In terms of even thinking of the term alum. I feel like UCLA actually has a pretty loose definition of what an alum means. And I think that has actually created accessibility for people to understand this. So, for example, we don't just count degree holders. We count folks that actually have at least a year. And we're very aware of this because we know in past history, higher education hasn't been a kind place for a lot of individuals of color or those that are coming from marginalized communities, so they may not finish. So I can tell you right now, some of my presidents I have of our networks, they aren't fully degree holders. The other thing too is we actually count extension holders too, extension certificate holders as part of our alumni base. So that's actually given us an entryway into also thinking about students as alumni, right? So on day one, during orientation, our students are welcome to the Alumni Association from the start. So I think there are some structural things our Alumni Association has done to create an access issue for students to feel like they can be a part of it. I think it also helps that our building is located right in the heart of campus, although I'd say prior to our restructuring, no one knew what that building was, and now students do since it's an orientation stop. When it comes to working with diverse students, I have to also disclose that the majority of my staff members come from student affairs. That's where we have recruited because there isn't a lot of diversity within this industry, I will say. It's always, I can probably name 20 to 25 individuals, Claribel included, that do the work across the nation. We're a very small cohort. And so it has encouraged us to think about creatively where we can recruit and pipeline for hiring. And so some of the most transferable skills, I believe, are actually from student affairs, right? They're student advising, and that's actually my background. And so I think that actually gave me somewhat of a leg up to think about how to engage with students. So in creating this program, I knew, given UCLA, 1 out of 3 graduates is first gen, we knew the concept of social capital around understanding an alumni association may be missing, right? So if you went to school, you're the first one to go, you never had parents that joined an alumni association, and then you had a terrible time. Like, why would you pay for something to then join, right? And so doing those structural things helped us unpack that. And then with our student affairs kind of background, we knew who to go to on campus to start these conversations. So although my program started 6 years ago, we spent almost a year and a half doing our homework, is the way I call it. We spent almost 6 months in the archives, and I went on a listening tour of almost over 70 student affairs people. You know, I think a lot of that allowed me to hear what the experience is. I'm actually not a Bruin. I needed to know that I can carry the culture with me as I meet new alumni and meet with students. If I can say I know the historical legacies of exclusion and inclusion at UCLA, I think it's going to make me feel more authentic with folks instead of like putting the labor on students to tell me all about the African Student Union, you know, tell me all about the Queer Alliance. Those are easy search things that I can look up on archives to say, oh, I know you started here. I know these are notable alumni of yours. To come to the table with students to then actually engage in a conversation. Because the common one I hear is, hi student group, I'm from the Alumni Association, may I have your list, right? We need to cut that out. It's eyebrows will raise, and 2, it's like, what are you gonna do with this list? And I don't know you, so why are you gonna talk to the folks in my community? So that building of institutional knowledge is really important to working with students. And then secondly, working with the student affairs staff. But I'll pause there because I know Clarabelle, I see her nodding. So
Well, I think everything you said, Patricia, one, I'm very sad because when you said that the reason why you guys make alumni so early, it was actually very commendable. That's not the reason why Duke does it. So after 2 semesters, you're considered an alum, but it's because of basketball players that lead to the NBA. So I commend UCLA for having a nice reason why, right? That is not the Duke reason, but after 2 semesters, you are considered an alum, but for different reasons. We do have a full-time person in our office that works with our student affairs area, and they connect with the centers that are associated with different identity groups. So the Black Student Center, the Multicultural Center, our gender center as well. So we have a person that does that full time, and then they connect with my team to do most of the work. We create a Forever Duke Student Award, so that way we can follow students that are leaders that have been identified by different faculty and staff. We give them an award, and then we follow them throughout their Duke experience as well as once they graduate. And we have a person that follows them along and helps them with the pipeline development on how to give back, and not just financially, but with their time and serve on different committees and boards. And then we also have this program called the Duke Next program, where we actually look at where students are headed, either in the summertime when they're doing their Duke Alums Engage, which is our community service and civic engagement program, or where they have an actual job. When they get into that city, we connect them with folks as well. So a few different things that we try to do to make sure that we continue that alumni spirit and that people want to serve and give back. So those are a few things I would say.
There's also one paradigm I'd also have you all consider. If you feel like students on your particular campus have been marginalized and there's a strong activist background, you may want to actually sit down with the student as if they're staff. That's something I actually learned later in our experience here, because unlike Duke and some other places, we actually don't have a multicultural center. We don't have a Black cultural center. We don't have those things. And so most of that actually rests with our student organizations. And so I almost have to treat them as, thank you for doing this for the university. You have put so much work to creating space for our marginalized students. I'm in the face of the challenge of the university, right? And so referring them to as like student leaders wasn't sitting, and that's something we had learned over time. But in that same note, it's also honoring the legacies of these student groups. So one of the first projects I did after spending so much time in the archives was going to student groups and saying, hey, you all literally should take up space in the library. Like, your history earns a spot on this campus. How about doing an archive project, which was great data for us. Right? So I got to see the rosters, I got to see the board members, but it was like this joint project instead of like hand over a list. This is something I was offering as a benefit to student organizations, was let's get your history in the library, you know? And so that's one initiative if you want to give it a try, that I think actually got received really well. The second one, because I know UW, I actually have a lot of friends that work there. The culture show seasons are actually really popular, you know, and that's where alumni come back. You know, if you think about the experience of dancing or performing or writing for a culture show, it's a lot of time. It's almost like a 4-credited class. And so we started doing quote unquote tailgates for culture shows, and that has been a really popular idea for those that may not like athletics. You know, why not come back and have a pre-reception before watching the show together? So 2 tangibles if folks are interested.
I love that. And thanks for shouting out. I mean, our Ethnic Cultural Center is amazing. Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity, they do amazing, amazing work with students. And I know a lot of our peers are on the call here today, and we're appreciative of that. So it's like that legacy is there, but it's that bridge from that to alumni that I think we're still kind of working on. I absolutely love the idea of cultural tailgates, because don't tell anyone, but I would rather see a culture show than a football game personally. This is being recorded, I shouldn't say that. So many questions are coming in. One quick thing I want to get to that we talked about briefly before is data. So this is the boring and ugly question. I'm sorry, everyone, but we have a struggle with knowing which of our alumni are people of color. So I did a little digging and was able to really understand what's going on with us. You know, we do have race or ethnicity data off of the student's application up to a certain point that has come over into our database, and then we didn't collect it anymore because that wasn't the intention of that data. The intention of that data was for an application, and so we felt like it wasn't appropriate to bring that in and use it for then like further alumni or advancement purposes, is my understanding of that. So we have really rough data in terms of understanding who is part of a community of color. You both have gotten around that in a lot of really good ways, and I'd love to hear more because we think about that a lot. So how do we bring alumni of color in without knowing who they are to start? And so would love, Clarabelle, you were talking about how you built the Asian Alliance, and I think that's an awesome, but tell us more too. I mean, you have probably lots of experience.
Well, you know, to Ellen's point, we do use the how they self-disclose when they apply to the university, and that does carry over from the student system to our alumni system. So that isn't one of our issues, but we do have a hard time collecting LGBTQ plus data. And so people have to self-identify. They can go to our network and update their information and can click on a box there if they would like to share that with us. We don't promote it, you know, we don't make it public if that's something they don't want either. So that's something that we want to make sure that they understand, that that's a private checkbox that would help us invite them to certain things, but it isn't something that we're sharing with other people, which is very, very, very important to a lot of members in that community. So we want to acknowledge that. I think with our Asian Alliance group, it was people that checked their box when they applied. We do have a lot of Asian students that decide that they don't want to self-disclose that. They feel that that's a discrimination policy when they're applying. And so they decide not to check that box. So we had to make sure that our newsletters expressed that we were starting this group, things that were going to all alumni, any type of invitation. Our regional group was out there talking to some folks as well. And it was shocking to see the amount of people that said, please include me, please include me. But we already had started with such a heavy database already. But I love the fact that we were able to get even more people that had that interest in sharing where they came from and who they are. I really am impressed with UCLA and the multicultural piece, because I think that's another reason why people don't identify, because the boxes just don't fit who they are. And so I think that's probably another place for us to head as well. So something to think about.
I actually love data. Data is, I moonlight actually as a doctoral student, and my research area is actually around Indigenous alumni. So when it comes to data, I want us to also have a diverse definition of data, right? So there's the pure numbers, right, of the composition and the percentages. That's important. But the other source of data that I think we often undermine is the qualitative side, which I think our industry is actually built on, right? Our industry is built on creating relationships, nostalgia, new memories with alumni. And so thinking about that kind of data is something I always tell folks to also consider. Think about this as a mixed method approach to understanding our alumni. When it comes to demographics, I often think it's a conversation that actually rests whether we have it or don't have it. And I think it's actually more complex than that. There's 3 areas that you got to really think about: your data source, the quality of that data, and how editable it is, and how it sits in databases, right? And that's where I see most of the barriers when it comes to diversity data around. We are lucky that we have a good relationship with our registrar, so the data has migrated, but the data hasn't been clean throughout all the generations. And so a big part of my startup here was understanding the quality of our data, right? So I know data, it can be a passion project for some and diversity. So for example, of a place that I had to think about was, why is there a bunch of Filipinos being pulled when we pull Latino data? I found out at some point, someone probably had a good intent, took a bunch of last names and was like, these sound Latino, let's add them to the Latino group. So it's also really important to think about the data quality as you think about storage and looking at it. So when it comes to new data, we have the registrar, but there are areas that we don't have sources of data, like our LGBT alumni, our Muslim mix, those we don't. And so that is actually crowdsourced. My first 2 years, we actually decided to hold a booth at 7 different prides across California to see if we can portray UCLA out in the community, right? Which is a great way to build our brand. But we had signups for like little tchotchkes and stuff like that. And that grew our list quite a bit. And then we started thinking about like, why are we thinking about engagement of our groups in this identity essential way? Do we really think only Black alumni can participate in Black alumni events? And so another source of data that we started looking at was going back through all our newsletters and seeing people that clicked on Black related articles or LGBT related articles. And if they demonstrated a click rate of a pretty high amount, we actually then ask for permission and say, hey, would you like to be added to this list? And that's sort of way we've been trying to source data to think about beyond identity, but actually thinking about cross-cultural connections. And if we're really thinking about diversity and inclusion, I'm pretty sure a lot of our groups are open. I mean, actually it would be illegal in California if we said only Black alumni can participate in the Black Alumni Association, so.
That's such a good point. And a lot of what you two are saying is really resonating with a lot of the themes that we've had across the last many days in terms of like this crowdsourcing or going into communities and actually, Lily wants to be you. So many people want to be you, Patricia. You know, going into communities and having, like, thinking about going to Pride festivals and having a booth there and like being present in experiences and events of the communities you want to serve and showing up, that's really resonating as a through line for me. So I appreciate you both mentioning that and bringing that to the forefront. Clarabelle, I want you to talk briefly about the women's network that you have, because I thought that was such a cool example of intersectionality and how we can, to get kind of to what Patricia was just saying, like how we can get through to many different types of alumni or people that we serve in one singular group or program.
Yeah, so we created the Women's Forum in the late 90s, and it was a derivative of the Women's Studies program was hosting some events in different regions, and so a lot of the women were like, well, what else can they do? And so we have about 25 chapters or regions is what we call them, that match our top 10 and 20 regions as well. And so we invite women to get together to have conversations that really uplift women issues and they're able to talk in a safe space. What we have found though is that our women's group in DC decided, hey, why don't we have a Women's of Color spin-off? And that becomes an area where we get together. And 2 years ago, we actually hosted a conference with over 800 people, 800 women. And it was the Women of Color group that decided, why don't we do this? And so I think that's what we're seeing is that the Women's Forum group is allowing for LGBTQ folks to have some intersection and to have conversation. So it's really allowing for it to be more of a collaboration amongst different identities. And that has been great to see. One thing that I will add about data, and I'm not a data lover like Patricia, but I will say that you have to really wonder, what is the question you're trying to answer? So a lot of times we want to say, are people involved? Are people involved? That's what who's engaged? Who's engaged? We found that 15% of Duke alumni are engaged, but we also found that 35% of alumni of color are engaged. So we are engaging alumni of color at a higher rate than our white alumni. So I needed to tell people, stop asking me who's engaged, because we have that down. What we didn't have down is how many alumni of color were actually hosting events, how many of them were actual panelists and speakers, and how many of them were actually on our regional boards and as leaders in our DA board. So, and how many are getting awards. So I had to shift our conversation about who's involved, because we were involved, that we were going to events at great numbers and larger numbers than our white counterparts a lot of times. However, we were not in the leadership roles that we needed to be in and developing that pipeline. And so that is what my team of 2 has really been focused on in the last year, and being intentional about that. And that's really helped shape. So when I look at the award winners for this upcoming year, we were able to increase that by 50%, having more alumni of color getting awards. So I think just be very mindful. What is the question you're trying to answer? Because it's very easy to say, who's engaged? I mean, I think we ask that all day, but then when you dig deep into the data, what's really missing? What are the gaps? And how do you analyze that differently? So
I love
like
that.
data doesn't help some of our groups, like American Indian, it just doesn't help, like it's too low. And so I think that's the question, because I've actually seen it as a barrier for people getting started, right? Not having data, so they don't start.
Yep. Yeah, we talked about that. It's like, well, I don't know, so I don't know how to start. This is so helpful. I'm getting so many questions in, and I just keep asking my own. So I'm going to have to go to the audience questions, or I'm going to get booted from this job. But this is awesome. Lots of questions coming in because people are really enjoying this conversation. So one question that I think is really important is, and you two play a critical role, especially as you work with students in their bridge to alumni, but then also working with alumni and alumni of color in particular. How do you begin, or how do you see your part as the staff member in playing in the healing process with students or alums who didn't have a good experience at the university?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical. We celebrated about 6 years ago the 50th anniversary of our first Black students to graduate. And we wanted to throw this huge campus extravaganza, and people didn't want to come, and so we had to go on a 10-city listening tour where we actually went into the different cities that had the largest amount of African-American alumni and had to sit through some very painful conversations and, just devastating to hear what they had experienced and to say, we're going to do better, we're going to do more and do different. I think the piece that I always acknowledge is what my role is and what I'm able to do in my capacity. I can't heal systemic racism, right? I just can't by myself. And so I'm never going to tell a group that you will never experience that again while I'm working here, because I can't guarantee that. But I can guarantee that we're going to create a better sense of belonging for you, that when there's events that we're going to make sure that you have a say on what it looks like. Like, I think there's things that we can actually say we can do, but you can't relive somebody's sociology class where they had the N-word said to them. Like that, we can't do that. But there are some things that we can do. But I do think that it's very important that we do step up, we acknowledge the hurt, and we just are getting ready to do another set of surveys and asking some questions of our alumni of color to really understand what their experience is like. and to see our students today still dealing with that type of stuff. And the truth is, yes. So we've come a long way in some areas, but we just haven't in a lot. And remember that when we think about inclusion, it just can't be functional inclusion. It just can't be check a box, check a box. It has to be social inclusion for it to really be transformational. And so that's really what we're really trying to work on.
You know, the role thing is really interesting for me. You know, I'm glad you all are having these days to talk about this, because that is going to create the foundation for you to be able to do this. I think oftentimes we think about our external constituent as the one that we need to engage with, but in the reality is, in a relationship building industry, you are so much part of that, right? So as much as you know about yourself, because this work isn't for the faint of heart, I don't think. So just to illustrate it for you, when I first arrived at the Alumni Association, we had just, prior to my days, they actually tried to wipe out all the networks and create sort of the nomenclature. So our Black Alumni Association, they were told there's only one alumni association. You can be the Black network of the UCLA Alumni Association. So I am inheriting all the vestiges of a moment in our alumni association that wasn't going well. And so I actually remember my first 6 months, I could not get a meeting. I just could not get a meeting with anyone because they didn't trust the Alumni Association. And so the way I've built trust, it was just continually being consistent, right? Being consistent with wanting to check in. And even when they started inviting me to meetings, I actually got wrong locations. When I got there, I was the only one that didn't get an agenda, and I wasn't allowed to speak. And then I found out from some groups a couple of years later, like, you know, we made a fake meeting for you, and then our real board meeting was another time, right? So, you know, that reality is real, and I think it's okay to acknowledge that and actually not be discouraged by it. And so the healing process for UCLA actually took almost 3 years. I couldn't actually even get a real sit down with our American alumni for almost 2 years, but it was this consistent demonstration. So I'd be sharing them articles and news, bias incidents that were happening from campus, saying, hey, I think your network should know about this. Is there anything I can do to assist? Showing and continually being consistent in terms of your directive is really important. The other thing too is also have your elevator pitch on why you're doing diversity. You can't just say we want more alumni engaged. Like, you can do that with anyone. Why this group? You know, and so for us, our elevator pitch was, we really want alumni to have a positive impact on campus climate. And that became sort of our drum throughout the whole thing. And people were like, yes, down with this. And then when revisiting this whole conversation, knowing a lot about yourself is sometimes it feels a little like I have multiple personalities. You know, we talk about this thing around code switching. I think a lot of staff of color can probably relate to this. In some spaces, I sound white. Some spaces, I sound more Asian. And I found myself thinking about my own narrative and how it relates to specific communities. Not to say that I can fully understand what that community is going through, but there are things that I can pull from my identity that probably will give me more insight to what it means to work with that particular community. And follow up. Follow up is so important. Just don't go ask it like, hey, what do you want to do? They give you a bunch of stuff and then you said nothing afterwards and you're waiting on the volunteer. So those are some tangibles that have been helpful for us.
That's super helpful. And actually that gets to another question. I'm going to phrase it. There's two sides of this question. So one, our staff is majority white, which we've talked about. We've also had a lot of sessions that have focused on the experience of the white person and the learning of the white person. So I don't want to focus too much on that, but it can be challenging as a white person to walk into those spaces and know you're part of this problem and gain trust. So I would say two sides of the same question. What advice would you have for the white staff in going into situations and communities where they may not be welcomed immediately or that they don't have experience being part of and may be fearful to overstep? And then on the other side, for our staff of color, I think what you just said was great, Patricia, but like what advice do you have for our staff of color who are also going into these situations that are fraught and potentially emotionally exhausting for them? So would love to hear your thoughts on both sides, both perspectives.
I had a student once tell me, Dean Peguero, real recognizes real. So I think authenticity is recognized easily. So I'm going to pose a question to you guys. So we need you to get to your chat box. I want you to think, and don't tell me who you're thinking about. I want you to think about a person that makes you feel important. Just think about him or her or they. Now in the chat box, I want you to put, what is it that they do to make you feel important? All right. So they see you, genuine, amplify, they value, focus, they listen, they affirm. So I want you to, that's it, you guys. That's your answer. Is I want you to think about how you can make a person feel important and how you're making the students and alumni do it. Whenever I've had a misstep with, remember, even though we are people of color, we represent a certain portion and have an identity that we relate to and others that we empathize with, but it's not our group, right? So we have to do that. And whenever I've been called in and said, Clarabelle, we didn't like what you did about this, it's because I haven't made them feel important. I haven't listened to what they're wanting. I've assumed that I understood. Of course I understand this. I haven't respected them and what their experience has been like, and I haven't really advocated. I've done what I wanted to do at the time that I wanted to do it, and it made sense. So as simplistic as that exercise is, it really is very helpful when you're trying to work with people that are different, is really just saying, oh my God, all people want to do is feel important. And so what is it and how do you do that? And all of you are saying exactly what I would tell you to do working with people that are different than you, is support. What are those meaningful questions you can ask? So thank you, Kathleen, for saying that, and Jodine to value and validate, right? So just, I hope that helped you really think about it in a unique way. It's just like, oh, I got this inside of me because I know what it feels like when I feel important. So
I'll answer it in the way that you asked it, but I'm going to start with the staff of color first. I feel like through the experience that I feel like I've gone through for the last 2 months, where the race conversation became so apparent, I found myself annoyed in certain places, and then unfortunately, and I say this intentionally, unfortunately grateful for other spaces, right? So one thing I had realized is, whiteness creeps. Like, whiteness is very pervasive. And I think prior to these months around thinking about Black Lives Matter, I can see how complacent I was with whiteness, that in some ways our industry is dependent on, right? Like, this is higher education is an institution that is part of the racist structure, right? And so having those conversations with yourself on how much do you align with whiteness and not, I think were really powerful for me and my staff. And so number one piece of advice is, as much as you love your team on campus, find some folks that are doing similar work and have another place to talk about it. It was like this almost like reunion of all the diversity practitioners. I felt like these past 2 months, everyone's reaching out to each other, trying to reconnect with each other, going like, do I sound like I'm okay? Am I doing this right? Because sometimes you can't rely on your own institution to find those resources, right? And I also think there is some reality around not actually sharing it in those spaces. There are some hard conversations you're probably gonna want to check yourself on, and it may not actually be safe to have those conversations within your own institution. So, create those networks. I know our professional network they have some spaces like that, but I think I think I'm happy to always chat with anyone. I'm pretty sure Clarabelle would be too. I think those are really important pieces to have as staff of color. Then the other piece too, is I realize how much, even as a person of color who feels really strong in her identity, there are moments that I'm like still feeling inferior, right? And I have to remind myself that the skills that I have acquired as a person of color, sorry, white folks, you're actually in the deficit. Right? So things around resilience or translating skills, not like literally linguistics, but like learning how to understand what I'm dealing with and making it make sense to me. Those skill sets are so important right now, and I think they're often undervalued. So one of the things that I saw was compensate me. I so appreciate that comment. One thing that I do with alumni is I do really acknowledge what they share with me as a real gift as an alum, right? Like, as much as I want to, it goes anti sort of what we want to do as alumni. So really acknowledging their time and their energy with us as a gift is super important. To the white folks, and actually to the staff of color too, you actually aren't going to be tested until you actually make a mistake. Right. So there is no perfectionism that you can actually put into this space. If you're going to try to do this stuff so you don't offend people, just get over it. You're going to offend people. And actually the true test of whether you're authentic or not is how you recover. Right. So if you think about how people learn about their marginalized identities, we often learn about these identities through the face of marginalization. Right, I understand. We have actually more practice understanding our social identities through negative experiences, right? And oftentimes, I don't want to wish that on others. I used to kid around as an educator. I'm like, when do I want to have the socio-political awakening for this student? Finals is just around the corner. This is probably not a good time, right? So, I say that in tongue in cheek to think about this process is messy, and you got to be okay with messy. And being okay with offending people. It's just how you're going to recover, right? If you end up guilting and emoting all over the place, I think someone's going to be like, nah, I don't think this person knows himself well enough. I don't know about this. But if you can respond in a timely way, it demonstrates that you can do it with your head and heart and hands, I'll give more kudos to that and want to work with the relationship more.
I love that. That gets to a question that we talked about a little bit, but when you enter into this work, which we've been doing, but we're entering into it in a much deeper way now, we all have to, you will receive critical feedback. And you will receive it from the communities that you are trying to reach and serve, and you will receive it from people who are just not ready for the work that you are doing. And I want to know when you listen to that, when you don't, and when you listen and act, when you listen and educate, do you do that? And when you just ignore. Because I've seen the things that come into the UW Alumni Association general email when on silly things like having a speaker of color that are just really hard to read. So there's kind of a spectrum there, but when do you respond to the haters? Or just the people who are upset?
Yeah, so I'm going to share a story. We did a town hall with all 4 of our identity groups, and I wanted our Black identity groups or leaders to have a big role in it because it was after George Floyd, and so I had the other groups kind of play a smaller role. I had my boss do the introduction, a white woman, and the Black Alumni Association had the chairs, who I have a very good relationship with, had this huge meeting with myself, my boss, and 2 other people because they did not like what the agenda looked like. And so to your question, Ellen, is when do you speak up or when do you say anything? And to Patricia's point about how you're working through your own identity, I am a Afro-Latina. My parents are Dominican. And to me, I always thought Black and Latino, I always thought we're one. I understand the plight. This is who we are. And at that moment, I had to allow them to express themselves, to share their thoughts about what needed to be done different. And we needed to come to a resolution. But I also couldn't let that moment escape without sharing who I was with the leaders. But I didn't think it was the right time to do it then. So I do think you have to really think about time and place is so important. And recognizing that we're all learning and growing. And this has been such an experience for me because I have really in my mind thought we were one. And this experience has taught me we're not. And I have to acknowledge there's a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of differences that really I have to acknowledge at that point. And so I think that once you can do that is take a moment and not take it so critical, so personal, and just take your time to reflect that you will see what are some things you could have done different. How do you open up and be just really listening to people and what they have to say? As far as getting those emails, we got over 500 emails about the town hall and how could Duke do this, and are we now Trump country, whatever they said. And you delete those. You say thank you and just delete those. And then the ones that ask about the recording, you say, sure, this is the time you're going to get it. I mean, I think if you know where you're coming from and why you're doing something, you got to recognize that you are going to get some people that won't ever get it. And then there's feedback you have to listen to and say, okay, what could I have done better? So when they said, we don't think a white woman should open up this town hall, okay, that was something I was like, I got to listen to this. And in my mind, I'm like, she's my boss and she should do the welcome, right? So I also want you guys to understand that what may sound right for us in our work, it makes sense, right? Your boss opens up a program, but sometimes it is not okay to be in some spaces. And that is, you have to acknowledge that. And we have a hard time with that because we want to be everywhere. And sometimes it's just not your place to be in. And I love what you said, Patricia. We can't not have allies in different groups, but sometimes you have to know when you should speak up and when you shouldn't, and when you should allow the space to be the only space for them. So.
Yeah, it's real. So I'll go with the most like tangible one, like the email that you get in your mailbox and you're like, wow, this is a lot. This doesn't sound great. I'm not sure what to do with this. I have actually asked my staff to always reply and actually reply to invite for a conversation. If the email isn't something that is a little way too not rational. Interesting enough, lessons learned is people then, we get sort of these different responses. One, let's engage, and then we actually have a phone conversation, and they actually then understand our mission, right? So Clarabelle's concentration on knowing what your mission is around this needs to be very, very clear if you're gonna choose to engage in feedback. The second group is, wow, I am totally embarrassed. I thought I was just sending an email out into the internet and did not think we were actually gonna get a response. Whoa. So they engage with us and they actually have become volunteers, right? So, and then there are some that are like, this is just not constructive in any way. I don't think you're gonna change your mind. So it's an email that goes, hi, thank you for the feedback. These are other areas of our alumni association you may want to engage with. Diversity doesn't have to be the area, like name it, right? Name it for them. And we can remove you from this mailing list if you like, right? So there are ways to think about those one-time kind of piece of feedback pieces. In terms of thinking about folks that are more long-term, I hope that you all develop relationships in ways with your volunteers that you can actually hear the feedback, right? And you just know at the beginning, you're just gonna get a lot. You're gonna get a lot of feedback. Find the truth in what you think is helpful and just toss the rest. But I've definitely had folks really comment on how I was approaching my work. So the other thing, in addition to the mission, is really understanding why you're doing what you're doing. So the only way that it works for me is I actually have to come from a theoretical background, right? Like we need different languages to talk to people via feedback. There's some people you can talk in terms of it's a heart conversation, right? We think diversity is important because it's a moral obligation. Then there's some folks that do talk about it through a business lane, and other people that talk about it as, a case for, morale. So coming from some sort of framework and explaining it to them, people are like, wow, you actually have done the work. You're not just doing this stuff willy-nilly. So I understand you put the time and thought into this. And I can see why this feedback is not useful anymore, right? So it's not about defending yourself. It's just making sure that you're entering this work with a lot of intention. So then you're actually able to filter what kind of feedback you get. I also have a folder of emails. I'm like, wow, you really don't like what we're doing. And this is sort of a badge of honor right now because I've actually really pissed you off. But I can see why I'm pissing you off because you actually don't like this change, right? So, there's that too, and it's also to help with staff morale. What is the most ridiculous email you got this year? And we'll so
I love that. There are some doozies that come in for sure. Super, super awesome. And Clarabelle, I love that that concept of white leaders giving space. It's definitely something that I've worked on and done, and it can be hard to give up. Visible presence at something that you feel passionate about, but it's really important to do. So I really appreciate you bringing that up too. So for our last question, I could talk to you two all day long, but we have our leaders, most of our advancement leaders are on this call right now, and I appreciate them being here for this whole time. I would love to hear what you would want them to know, but specifically, we just got a great question in, which is how do you convince advancement leaders to allocate resources to affinity engagement when it doesn't always result in donating to the university? So our resources are skewed towards fundraisers, fundraising, and things that bring dollars in. We just closed a really successful campaign. We raised $760 million last year alone. Our fundraisers do amazing work. So do our engagement officers and our marketing folks and lots of other people. So yeah, what would you want to say to the leaders who are here on this call that might be something they should consider?
It's not a short trip that you're taking. It's a long journey, but I'm telling you, the payoff is going to be phenomenal. I mean, as you look at the workforce and where our alumni of color are really thriving in industries, they will have the funds. And I also, with our annual fund group, I love working with them because they are fine with $5 as well as, some of our major gift officers. But really, we have to be very careful in assuming that people's ability to give. And I know we do all these formulas behind the scene and we know how much their house costs and all of that. But sometimes you have no idea of family wealth. You have no concept of who they're going to become. And so $10 can turn into 20, can turn into more. We all know those things. Do not lose sight. And especially if somebody feels important to you, feels respected, feels heard, feels like you're advocating, all of the things we've talked about, feels supported, they will come back and write some very nice checks. And one of the schools that probably does it best is Syracuse University. Since 1983, they've had a multicultural advancement office. I'm a proud alum of that school. I give back because of what I experienced as a student, and I was taught to give throughout my time there. They have programs that really engage alumni of color as well as ask for the money and the donation. So the philanthropic efforts align, and you're giving to things that mean something to you. So I've never had an advancement officer call me to buy a brick on a wall. If I'm like, well, how is that going to help the Black and Latino kids, right? That's my first question. So you have to understand. And if the brick is going to help, if it's going to be for the Black and Latino building, I'm okay with that. But just understand what you're asking money for and why they would want to give it. And I know there's a lot of questions about, can you have scholarships that are just for Black students and the answer is yes. And I know people are like, how is that possible? We could talk about that in another day, but just there has to be things that are important to them. What were they involved in as students? What were some of the gaps that they saw? Right now, we're working on an endowment for having more professors of color at Duke, and alumni of color are coming out in groves to give money to that because they would have wanted that themselves. So just think about those opportunities. And so don't give up. The money's coming. You might have to invest a little more at the beginning, but it's coming.
Also, don't assume that the money is not there, right? So one of the studies that I did probably in year 3 of mine was because so many of our groups, as much as I didn't want to do fundraising, so many of our groups are dedicated to fundraising. So I have to play in this game. We actually don't have a comprehensive person that looks at diversity fundraising. So actually, let's say a Latino alum could be hit by 6 different development officers, one from like a Latino studies program, one from like a health program. That is not intentional, right? Like that does not, I think that not bode well for any of us to have this disparate kind of ask system. So the money is there, but also the way we structure it is problematic at UCLA, which we're trying to work on. The other piece is when I actually pulled the data, we looked at it and we're like, this is really interesting. So if we took out the giant outliers, like the $1 million gifts, and looked at sort of within a reasonable kind of giving place, we found that alumni that identified as quote unquote diverse were giving at the same rate as our white peers. But the difference is there were more prospect managers and advancement officers assigned to white alumni than there were of alumni of color. right? So now, if you can only imagine, if they are afforded the same kind of advancement resources, would the amounts given be bigger? The other thing too is take a look at your donor data, because your donor data is actually probably more accurate than any other data because we're getting donations in. And so when we looked at that, we actually found out that our 18 to 24 African American folks were actually giving at a higher rate, and our American Indian folks from 60 to like 70 were giving at a higher than the average rate. Of course, there's some like population numbers skewing, but that was actually really powerful data to show the advancement officer. The other issue is that the fundraising business in general. Unfortunately, I think development officers turn over too fast. That's been my experience at UCLA. We often see someone in a position maybe 2 to 3 years, they do well on a campaign, and then they move on. And so that doesn't bode well for our working long-term relationships with diverse communities. Like, how do you ask for something that's so personal with a new development officer? I've gone through 4 different scholarship fundraisers during my time at UCLA, and I've only been here for 7, right? So it's hard to keep rebuilding these relationships over and over again. The other piece too, as you all know, systematic racism impacts the systems that we use to actually prospect, right? Zip codes. We know redlining exists, right? So when we think about these assets of pulling data from these banks that actually have racism in them, how will that ever get us to actually asking our diverse alumni? And then the last piece too is get clarity around whether you can give for race-based or not. I've seen so many development officers not have they're lacking the knowledge around how to talk about those things and actually don't understand the legal landscape, right? So please understand whether you can or can't do it, because I actually get donors calling me saying, so I heard this from a development officer, is this true? That should not be a question I should be asked, right? The development office should know that already. And then this is just a call for everyone. We know Prop 209 is up for grabs down here, but I know race-based giving and race-based kind of assets and programming is up in conversation this year. And that's something I hope development officers actually get engaged with. And I'll say this in a eye-opening way for me. Every time I meet with a development officer, I ask them, when's the last time you actually did something around multicultural competency in philanthropy? And I'm starting to realize that there hasn't been that at UCLA. Development officers, feel free to go to your community events. There are so many galas and fundraisers for nonprofits, probably not right now because of the pandemic. But that's actually a great place to prospect. You know, I've taken development officers to things like our Asian American Advancing Justice in Los Angeles gala. And we found out that most of the donors there were actually Bruins. So there are ways to think about this in more creative and more intentional than just thinking about databases and prospecting through the means that you're already being offered.
And I just want to tell a funny story real quick. There was a Black alum from a very small town in North Carolina, and he was a chicken farmer. Nobody ever asked him for money, but guess who he sold his eggs to? The only company was McDonald's. So when he died, millions of dollars, but nobody ever thought to go ask the chicken farmer for money. So I remember that story a lot. I hope that that sticks with you, because there is money out there, but we do need to feel that level of trust and connection to what Patricia's saying. To just be called and we don't know who you are and you're asking for money is something that startles us, and we're not interested in doing that. So building that level of connection is so, so important. But there's a lot of chicken farmers out there, so.
You two are amazing. I am so sad our time is over, because I really would like to keep speaking to you. Thank you so much, Patricia and Clarabelle. Let's give them a round of applause. I'm hearing a lot of follow-ups. Lee, Dan, Susan, someone, sounds like we should have a follow-up conversation on fundraising, race-based fundraising initiatives and what's legal and what's not. We actually got a couple questions in the chat about that. So I think that sounds like a to-do in the future, and many, many other things. So I took a million notes, and I'll be following up with both of you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for being here and listening. I'm going to kick it over to my very, very favorite person, Miss Amy Goodlow, to close us out of what has been a brilliant 5th annual engagement summer session. Amy.
Oh, thank you so much, Ellen. And thank you for the leadership that you've brought to our work, and such wonderful leadership of Engagement Summer Session. So Engagement Summer Session came to be because you saw a need in our community that wasn't being filled. And it has grown this year to where we've identified another need in our UW community to learn how to support our colleagues of color, our alumni of color, and our students of color, who we have collectively not been stewarding well. So thank you for starting this train and keeping it going so well. We have shared a lot of resources with all of you and introduced you to a number of people over the last 2 days. And we will be sharing our resources and recordings with all of you. So keep an eye out, and we'll let you know when they're up. So as anybody who has done events of any size knows, it takes a whole slew of people to make something like this happen. And as you can imagine, in a pandemic, it takes some really special folks to make this happen. So a quick thank you to Rabia Ramzan for driving our ESS bus, not just today, but through the whole process. And thank you for delaying your start at your new job at Earth Lab just to get us through. Thank you to Zoe Gano for your event expertise, and being flung across the electrons into every speaker's green room or breakout room to make sure everyone was ready to go. Thank you so much. Thank you to Melissa Kruptel for helping us with the big fancy Zoom, and for your incredible spotting of incoming speakers joining and everybody who accidentally unmuted themselves. You are the fastest mouse in the West. Thank you. A special shout out to Eric Tennyson from Thought Exchange, who has joined every single one of our sessions and fed me real-time updates on what you all were thinking. It wasn't really me, it was Eric. So we couldn't have done this without you. If anybody wants to use Thought Exchange in your next event, Eric's your guy. He's gonna make it easy for you. And finally, Ellen, Robbie, and I didn't come up with all these speakers ourselves. We reached out to those folks who knew more than us, who mined their personal networks and did a great amount of labor for us envisioning how this session could go. So a really special shout out to Terry Hiroshima, Leilani Lewis, and Priya Frank for helping us bring these voices together. But the biggest thank you goes to all of you. Thank you for committing to do better to all of our Huskies. We cannot fall into the trap of writing ourselves thank you notes for spending a couple hours on Zoom to pull from our opening keynote VU. This session, the whole Engagement Summer Session, hopefully serves as a catalyst to start making change. And I put that weight of making that change on all of you, not just for the folks who are holding leadership positions, but change won't happen unless we're all on board actively working to change the way we do business. The freshman class of 2019, who just finished up their first year, reported themselves to be 34.4% Caucasian. So for generations, our systems and policies and ways of thinking have been built to support those students. But the other 65.5% of now our sophomore class, the rest of our current students and the alumni of color who have come before them can't wait for us to figure this out later. We can't wait to put this on a committee to think about systems that we need to change. We need to support all our students. So it's easy for us to say, well, I'm not in leadership, so I can't make structural change. And Leilani, Brian, and Ruth this morning challenged you on that. Every single person here can start making the change this afternoon. You can remind folks that they have a little racism in their teeth, like we talked about earlier when you notice it. It happens to all of us. It happened to me yesterday. And I want you to make sure that when your decisions are being made, there's voices around the table that should be there. If you work in communications, what stories are you not telling? If you're on the academic side of the house, are your students missing something? Are your faculty empowered to understand how to support all their students and not just the cis white male students? How are you distributing your endowment funds? As we've learned so well in this pandemic, engagement can't be bringing everyone back to campus for a lecture, but also engagement can't land exclusively in the hands of our constituent relations officers, those folks that Ellen and I support throughout the year. We all need to engage our students, alumni, and friends in authentic ways, and we need to empower each other and remind our deans, our department chairs, our CAOs, our administrators to do that too. For those of you who participate in roundtables, our event managers, our disco officers, our MGOs, our CAOs, XLT, I encourage you to bring these conversations into your gatherings So this work is done across our organization in addition to working within your teams and units. So thank you for spending 2 mornings in the world of engagement, and I can't wait to see where you go from here. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.